Okay, so it's just after 1:30. Thank you very much for joining the call. This is obviously to discuss Project Gigabit, and we have an extremely good panel of speakers, very knowledgeable panel of speakers for you. I'll just let people know who's going to be talking. First of all, could I ask, if you're not going to be speaking, could you put yourself on mute? That would save any extraneous noise. The first speaker we'll have up on the platform is Martin Taylor, Chief Commercial Officer of BD UK. Who will talk about where we're up to and what's coming next in terms of Project Gigabit. We'll follow that with Tim Stranack and Martin discussing an overview of the programme and particularly vouchers. Tim Stranack, I think people on this call may or may not know that Tim has just become INCA's new chair. So congratulations, Tim, and welcome to your first webinar as chair of INCA.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Following that, we'll have Andy Murphy from BD UK talking about fixed wireless access, which has been of some concern and certainly interest to quite a lot of altnets involved in BD UK programs. We'll have a question and answer with Martin and a number of his colleagues from BD UK before we have a very short break, 5-minute break, just to grab a cup of tea at 2:45. Following the break, we'll have David Cullen and James Thornby, two very familiar people who have been supporting a range of different altnets in their BD UK bids and getting involved in the whole programme. James will then go on to give a short overview of the wholesale access requirements that people have to meet in order to be able to qualify for BD UK support. And then we've got three different speakers speaking about different approaches to wholesale, both at the active level, service providers, and at the more passive level, Toby Treacher, Rob Leonards, and Lloyd Felton. And then we have a panel of people who've actually won the contracts under BD UK, which is really helpful to have. And they'll be giving their views of the process, some of the lessons they've learned, etc., etc. So that's the schedule for the afternoon, the agenda. There will be opportunities during the course of the afternoon to ask questions. If you use your little hand signal to indicate that you want to ask a question, you move immediately to the top of the screen, which is extremely helpful because we can see that you want to ask a question. So please do use your reaction and raise your hand if you want to ask a question. We've now got something over 50 people on the call. A few more are going to be joining in, I'm sure, but that's, they'll be joining us as soon as they can. I'd like to now hand over to Martin. Welcome to, I think, your first webinar, first INCA webinar from BD UK. So over to you, Martin, to give us an update on where things stand.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, and congratulations, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. Look, I want to just start immediately by addressing what is probably the largest elephant in the room today, which is the new funding platform. I want to acknowledge that the funding platform has not been without issues, and we're sorry that it's currently offline, and I fully recognise the disruption that this is causing a number of you. We have made payment runs, you've hopefully seen, so I'm hoping that those of you who were expecting these have received them. We are working hard to get the platform back up and running again. Our hope is that this will be in the next few days, but I can't give a precise date, I'm afraid. We will, though, continue to keep you informed. We sent out a bulletin to providers a little earlier today, and we'll be sending a further one on Monday. So we will continue to communicate with you during this period. Now, I know many of you have been finding the new platform harder to work with at this stage than WordPress. I would say that there are a couple of things I would ask you to bear in mind on this. WordPress was not fit for purpose. While we had just about made it workable, it had major flaws, and it significantly limited our ability to audit and track public money and projects or provide it in your report on vouchers. The new platform will be able to do so. It will also, over the coming months, have additional functionality added to it, which should make it easier for you to use as well, and include functions that were not available with WordPress. Yeah, aside from that, and obviously the real problems that are being caused by this and the glitches in the system that you have helped identify, a change of system is very rarely totally smooth, and so I'm not surprised that there is some adjustment time And I'd ask you to bear with us while we fix this, which we will. And please, could I also just ask that you all continue to treat our staff respectfully during this period. They're working flat out to try to get it up and running again and to support you. There have unfortunately been a couple of instances of poor behaviour, which we don't really, I'm just not really willing to tolerate. Thankfully, though, this is a small minority, and many of you have actually engaged incredibly positively with the team, and we're very grateful to you for doing so, including providing some very excellent suggestions about the system which we've taken on board. We really do value this input. I just thought it was important to say that up front, and I'll now go, and I'll talk a bit more about vouchers in a bit with Tim, but we'll for now just return to BDUK more generally and Project Gigabit in particular. So move on to the first slide, please, Katie. Thank you. So you may be aware that 2.5 weeks ago, we moved into a brand new department, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, along with colleagues from a number of colleagues from DCMS, from the Digital Infrastructure team, who obviously lead the policy on broadband. BDUK continues to operate as an executive agency, and we really don't anticipate any changes in this respect around our governance, our structure, or our staffing. We'll continue to deliver Project Gigabit and the Shared Rural Network programs, and our delivery plans and objectives remain unchanged. We don't foresee any changes in how we'll be working with you, and you shouldn't see any difference in our delivery, with the exception, of course, that we will improve the delivery of the funding platform in the coming days. Your primary points of contact will remain the same, and there should be minimal disruption in the way we work together. So moving on, I'll start to talk about where we are on Project Gigabit. Katie, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our aims for for the procurements under Project Gigabit, as you'll know, are to use as much supply capacity in the market as possible and to encourage as much competition as possible. And we continue to track commercial market progress, very regularly with the next national OMR, open market review process currently underway. We continue with the procurements we have in procurement processes we have in place for the local type A's, so the smaller lots of sort of 1 to 10,000 premises. The type B regional ones of anything up to about 150,000, and you'll be aware that we are soon going to go to market on type C. We're currently in pre-procurement market engagement on that, and so that'll be for the areas where we are finding that there is no appetite to build under the other procurement vehicles. If we can move to the next slide, please. So we're making solid progress on our procurements. Since August of last year, we've now put in place 6 contracts. I think it's going to be 7 very shortly. And pleasingly, this is with a range of providers. So competition is working. Multiple providers in the market are winning these contracts, so we're delighted about that. We've launched some 20 procurements so far, and there are probably another 20 or 25 to go over the next year or so. Public review is now complete in all of England and Wales, and is currently underway in Scotland, as you'll see from the little map here. Next slide, please. So just a couple of things on procurement. Look, we know that public procurement requires a lot of effort and a lot of investment, and takes a lot of time. And those of you who are participating in it, will have experienced, how much work goes into it. Our approach is a very rigorous one. We are custodians of large sums of public money. We're under a terrific amount of scrutiny from within our own department, from the Treasury, from Cabinet Office, Central Commercial Assurance, and you've probably seen from the National Audit Office as well. At each stage of each procurement, we need to demonstrate to a range of stakeholders that we are satisfying a range of criteria and meeting procurement and value for money standards. This is why we ask for so much information and why we are pretty strict in our evaluation of bids. What we do is try to minimize hurdles as much as possible, and we carry out lessons learned exercises following each procurement and try to make pragmatic changes where we can. And we're keen to engage with you on this, and to this end, we recently held calls on wholesale access and benchmarking. There will be more of these, but please do continue to take part in these and attend these calls. So where are we on delivery? Next slide, please. So with Superfast, the delivery continues to progress really well. We're really pleased with where we're getting to. About £90 million of funding is available to extend existing Superfast contracts to provide further gigabit coverage, which hopefully is very good news, so that we can kind of go even further than than we would have hoped. So far, we've connected over 625,000 premises passed up to the end of March of last year, and we expect that to hit and exceed 700,000 by the end of next month. So really good progress from our perspective in the past year. So thank you for playing your part in that. Next slide, please. So Type C. This is the single supplier framework, which we will be awarding under the restricted procedure with a 4-year lifespan. The scope covers up to around 500,000 premises, and the estimated value is about £800 million. We'll be awarding the first call-off contract alongside the framework, and as I mentioned a little earlier, we're currently carrying out pre-procurement market engagement on the intervention areas. And subsequent call-offs will be subject to market data and both pre-procurement feedback and the outcomes of our other A and B procurements. We are also working with the devolved administrations to support their procurement strategies, which may include a degree of Type C as well at some point, but we don't know that yet for sure. Next question, next slide, please. So at the supplier event we held back in October, Laura, a commercial director, spoke to you about this idea about called the fund, which is like a sort of mini Type A procurement. We're still developing our thinking on this. It's progressed quite a long way from where we were back in October in terms of the internal development here. We see it as a real opportunity to fill pockets of non-commercial or unbuilt premises using these small contracts. We're expecting there to be at the end of the the A's and B's and the C's, there to be pockets left over which might be too big to be filled by vouchers, and where this could provide a better, potentially quicker vehicle to deliver these. We don't yet have a timeline for launching it because we're really very focused on the current vehicles, but thinking has, as I say, progressed a long way, and development work has started. We will continue to seek input from suppliers for this model. We are sure that these pockets are going to exist, and we will, before too long, have the capacity internally to develop this further and take it to market. Just a couple more details on the next slide about what it entails. So it will be a multi-supplier framework, again awarded under a restricted procedure with a lifespan of 2 to 4 years to be decided. Scope of around 200,000 premises, with each call-off being around the sort of 2,000 mark, and a value of around, we think, around £300 million. But obviously, there's more work to be done on that. There would be a requirement for it to be gigabit capable technology, as you'd expect, for there to be wholesale access, but slightly simplified clawbacks compared to the bigger contracts. And we would expect there to be a fixed funding period for each of these call-offs. So that is it, really, by way of update, Malcolm, on Project Gigabit. I could go on and talk a little bit about vouchers, but I could wait for the next bit of the agenda.
Thank you very much, Martin. That's very helpful. We've got a question and answer session coming up after we've done these three sections of it, as it were, vouchers, followed by Martin's presentation on the main program, followed by vouchers and fixed wireless access. So if we hold on to the questions until then, Tim, let's go to you next. You just to make a few points about the broad program and talk a little bit about vouchers, and then we can have a discussion about vouchers.
Yeah, perhaps before Martin alluded to it, and there was one question, and sorry to jump in before the question and answer, but Martin, there was something in a recent bulletin about a PACE project or PACE projects. So before I do my bit, I wasn't sure if you just wanted to say something about that. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes. Yes, I'm very, very happy to do that. So look, what we obviously want is quick delivery wherever possible, and so we've devised this sort of approach to PACE projects where if people have areas in areas that are due to go to procurement, but potential voucher projects there, we're quite keen. Sorry, I have a note which I've just misplaced, which is why
I'll put you on the spot. I apologise.
That's okay. Just give me one moment, and I should get there. But look, essentially, what we don't want to do is we have a sort of no steel doors idea, which is that where there are projects that clearly meet value for money criteria, that don't intervene in the intervention areas in a way that would be disruptive to our ability to procure those areas, and where suppliers are able to deliver them quickly, then we are very willing to consider those projects. So we would urge you to come forward with those. There are a number of criteria that we will take into account when we are assessing whether or not we will allow them to progress or not, and part of that will be around previous performance. But we're aware that there are potentially some areas where people are keen to get going, able to do it in a way that delivers for us pretty quickly, and doesn't disrupt the intervention area to the extent that we will struggle to find a bidder or multiple bidders for them. So that's kind of it in brief.
That's good. No, that's great. And perhaps we can touch a bit more on it when we get to question and answers. But I think that sort of reaction from BDUK in terms of the PACE project, I think is a really positive move. The mood, I was going to say, that I've been getting from INCA members in my previous role as the chair of the policy and regulatory group, but now in the chair role, is they really want to work with you. They really want to work with BDUK to help reach those hard to reach properties as quickly as possible. And I think that's reflected in the fact that we've got members that are winning Type A and Type B procurements, and indeed a lot of members have been heavily involved in the voucher scheme, which has proved very popular amongst members, despite some of those recent admin issues that you alluded to, but I'm sure we'll get over those pretty quickly. So, but I think the other message I'm getting back from members is it often seems that BDUK sort of excluding INCA members from the process, sometimes for what they consider to be spurious reasons, and that may be the case, or that may just be a breakdown in communications. I mean, to give some examples, 75, as far as we can see, 75% of build plans that you're getting through sort of OMRs and PRs are being at least partially rejected, and I think that may be a case of applying the tight procurement criteria, which I completely understand, too soon in the process, and that's one thing we'd like you to consider, sort of releasing the rope a little bit, because we think it's important that you do know what operators' ambitions are in terms of build, and you know, just rejecting their build plans sort of hinders us getting a countrywide view of what's going to actually be built or what's planned to be built. You know, plans are plans. No one can guarantee a plan in 3 years' time, but it would be useful to get visibility, a complete visibility of what people are proposing. There was obviously big concern that, you know, new vouchers had effectively been, new voucher projects had effectively been closed down by the procurements being kicked off. You know, the pace project maybe gives us an opportunity there, and as I say, that's very exciting. We're also worried where type A and Bs seem to have been skipped because of supposedly no demand, and it skipped straight to type C. We thought BDU's commitment where there was only to include properties in type C that weren't included in anyone's build plans. Well, in that first round of type C properties you've published, we know that at least some of those are in operators' build plans, and obviously we'll feed that, and I'm encouraging members to feed that data back to you as part of the market engagement exercise, but we don't seem to be following through on the commitment that only properties that won't be built to will be included in type C, and skipping over type A and Bs to go straight to type C is also concerning. You know, where an operator comes back and says, well, we'd prefer you did vouchers, but if you don't do vouchers, we would consider a type A, or we would then consider a type B, doesn't mean there's no demand for type A or type B. It's just a preference to vouchers. And just a couple of other examples. It looks like then as you do get into the procurement, you've some of the rejections of sort of bids are around that the money for the build is not actually in the bank account. So despite getting reassurances from investors that the money is there and will be made available, because it's not actually in the bank account, you seem to be saying, oh well, that's not good enough. And to be fair, I'm sure Openreach don't have all of their money in their bank account for their build at the moment. So again, this may come down to communication, but that's the message that members are getting back. And then the final one was that, as you alluded to, SME businesses find public procurements extremely hard and possibly more costly than bigger operators who've obviously had bid teams for a long time and have the standard questions already answered and can just pull those out from their archive rather than having to generate them afresh. So potentially the cost of an SME getting involved in a public procurement is even more than it is for an incumbent. And I think, you know, government policy is to encourage SMEs to participate in these public procurements. And so anything BDUK or other government departments can do to help SMEs in that process would be immensely helpful. The analogy I was going to use is, it feels at the moment, particularly with type C, that BDUK are almost trying to lure the big slow monster into the playroom, while you've got a load of kids in the playroom, some that are growing up very fast, that are very creative and very innovative and really want to play with BDUK in the playroom. If you do manage to lure that monster into the playroom, the risk is that they're going to eat some of the kids and probably won't then deliver anything till 2026, because they've already got their plans set out through to 2026. And then what's going to happen is all the kids in the playroom are going to spend all their time and effort trying to push the big monster out again. And so that's sort of the analogy that I've picked up in speaking to various members. And so the risk of that is, if we do, there is a risk that if we carry on the way we're going at the moment, your procurements potentially are going to get challenged, because you will find that you're procuring subsidy for properties that have already been commercially built. And I feel sure that members will then look to challenge those procurements. The single supplier framework, again, it's confusing, and it may be a communication thing. It's confusing why you're insisting on a single supplier framework there. We're not experts in the government rules around single supplier frameworks, but it seems confusing you're going for a single supplier. And I suspect that may well get challenged at scrutiny as well. So I think that's the messages I'm getting back from members. Those are the key points that members are making. I think that, you know, anything innovative and creative we can do in the voucher space is very much welcomed, and really keen to work with you on developing those thoughts and plans.
Thank you very much, Tim. I mean, I once did accuse BT in a public accounts committee meeting. I once accused BT of being a bit like a vampire death squid, but I've never accused them of eating children, cannibalizing the playroom of the children. Anyway, Martin, how would you respond?
Okay, so Tim, there's quite a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
Where shall I start? Look, on the OMR process, I think we're pretty transparent about the way in which we assess suppliers' build plans and the reasons for either accepting or rejecting them. I understand, of course, that it is frustrating when we don't, but you know, we have a policy imperative, and we need, under that policy imperative, we need certainty, as much certainty as we can get, that that areas are going to be built within a certain period of time. And if that is not sufficiently there, using the criteria, which are quite robust criteria, then that is where we go and put in place an intervention area, and we go out and procure. And of course, we have the initial scope under the procurements, and then deferred scope, where we have not complete faith but decent faith in suppliers or in builders' plans, so that if those do materialize, then they're done, and we don't then need to invoke that deferred scope part of the contract. Hopefully we'll never have to use the deferred scope bit of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be terrific for everyone, including the people who will be more quickly in receipt of fast broadband, and the taxpayer. I would need to take away the question about providing complete visibility of everything that everyone is proposing. I don't know how comfortable we'd feel about that, but let me take that away, and I'll come back to you with an answer.
I certainly think there are commercial considerations about making sort of that information public, although I think we're of a view that stuff that's definitely stuff that has been built shouldn't be too confidential, because in the whole, operators want to know when stuff has been, want consumers to know when stuff has been built. Build plans, I understand, are a bit more. What I'm actually saying there is more to your former point, which is just loosening the rope a bit on what goes into that deferred scope, and not rejecting quite as much as perhaps you have been. 75% does seem high.
It's not 75% in total, it's 75% of plans get some of them rejected. Is that correct?
Partially rejected, yes. It's about 25%. According to the parliamentary question response back in September, it was about 25% that were being fully rejected.
Okay. Yeah, 75 did sound very high to me.
And our assumption is that BT is not included in any of those. Although that is
as you would not expect me to comment on individual suppliers.
No. Mm-hmm.
On the concern around closing down vouchers in procurement areas, I mean, this, I understand it, but this isn't exactly unexpected. We need to at some point go, this area, in order for it to be a viable procurement area, has to stop having other interventions happening within it. And that is why we're doing. But we have, through the PACE project, I recognize that there might be exceptions there where we are able to kind of still do something. I suppose I could say that actually vouchers had a little longer than you might initially have anticipated, given that our procurement program started a little later than originally planned. So
I think people relaxed into it.
But there you go. Skipping A's and B's. We're not skipping A's and B's. The only areas where we are not taking stuff forward is where we're finding a lack of interest, or a lack of really credible interest. We're not going to progress with an area if the only provider who comes forward by our assessment not able to deliver it. So we really aren't doing that. And actually, we have more A's and B's now than we initially thought we were going to have. And actually, that flows through into where we are with the proposed intervention areas for the Type C, which is smaller, the initial areas, smaller than we had originally anticipated it being, which demonstrates that there is more interest and more credible build elsewhere than we thought might be the case. So I'd take, again, I'd take some comfort from that. We have published a decision tree in the Type C documentation. We are following that very clearly. We are highly alert to the fact that we need to follow a rigorous process to get to the point at which we put something into Type C. The last thing we want is legal challenge, Tim. So we're treading with a lot of care going into this. Now, look, I understand your concerns about OpenReach. They are, very long established and well known. Whether I've always said we would welcome other bidders, we'd welcome consortium bids for this. We will see what transpires in the coming months as we go into that procurement. On your point about rejecting bids because the money isn't in the bank, that is not correct. We need certainty that the money will be available. It's a different thing. It doesn't need to sit in a bank account.
Can you give an example of the evidence you need for that?
Well, it's all published in the procurement documentation.
Okay, because we thought letters of comfort from investors would be sufficient, but it seems not.
But it does depend on the nature of the letter of comfort. But Matt, do you want to come in here?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, just managing multiple microphones in the room. The key test is whether the funding is being made available for the particular project, the particular premises that are being claimed for. So it's not just sort of general letters of comfort. It's knowing that X amount of pounds is available, and for the premises that are being claimed, that they're going to need X amount of pounds. So we can link the funding to the build. And it's not exclusively the funding. We're also looking at whether the supply chain is in place, whether the sort of design work has gone to a certain level. I mean, in general, and maybe if I just go back to that 75% point, often, and we ask for from operators to submit the build plans. These are multi-phase build plans, some of which are in build, and we categorise them as grey, some of which are planned and funded, and we categorise them as grey or under review, depending on what stage they've got to, and others are in plan, are sort of identified for future phases, but without all the minimum requirements that we're looking for being in place, i.e. there is still a degree of uncertainty around whether they will be built, whether the money will be there to build them in particular. And in focusing on our 99% objective, we're proceeding on the basis that there's some, the risk is too great that commercial coverage won't build there, so we proceed with the procurement.
Okay, we'll probably come back to that in questions, but I just wanted to check whether there was anything else Martin wanted to add before we move to questions and answers, some of which I note are coming up in the chat. So if you do have questions as things go through, then do please put them in the chat and I'll pick up on them shortly.
Yeah. Sorry.
So I don't think I've got anything to add to what Matt said. I think your final point was about the cost of bids for SMEs. I don't really. What's your ask here, Tim? Look,
my ask is that there is more government support to SMEs for help providing guidance in putting together bids. Now, I understand that can move us into issues around conflict of interest. But if the government does want SMEs to be more engaged in public procurement, then they are going to have to provide some way of helping them understand some of the standard supplier questions, which the big incumbents will have answered a million times before and therefore know exactly the wording to use. Whereas SMEs who are answering them for the first time won't necessarily know the responses they need, which are then causing their bids to fail.
Thank you. Let me take that one away. There is an SME team in the Cabinet Office commercial function. They may be able to provide some useful documentation, and I'll take it away and discuss with the team here as well.
Thank you.
We can return to some of these questions when we do the Q&A a little bit later, but shall we move on now to the fixed wireless part of the agenda and ask Andy to take over speaking, if that's okay. Hello, Andy. You're on mute at the moment, I think. We can't hear you, Andy.
We can't hear you, but we can see you're not on mute. So I don't know if you have a microphone problem.
Go for it. You should be...
Right. How are we doing now?
We can hear you.
Brilliant. That's a good start. Welcome, Tim. Thank you for the invite. This is my first contact with yourselves at INCA and my first online INCA conference. Really glad to be here. I want to roll on to the first slide. That'd be great. So, my name is Andy Murphy. I'm head of technical operations for BD UK. I wanted to give a quick intro and talk about process before we move into some of the questions around FWA. I am pretty new to BD UK. I'm pretty new to the civil service. I have spent most of my career working in industry, and most of that within the telecoms industry. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. I'm really lucky in that, what I do, I've landed in a civil service role where I'm quite passionate about what we do. I live in a rural community, have lived in rural communities for much of my life, and have seen the work of BD UK and the work of altnets and suppliers within the industry in connecting rural locations. So I know the impact that you guys on this call can have. I am technical lead for BD UK as a whole, and I'm also responsible for all GIS technical evaluations, so across OMR, PR, SQ and ITT. A member of my team will be involved in that process at some point. As I alluded to, I've worked in telecoms for a long time. I've worked for Vodafone, I've worked for BT, I've worked for the monster, the vampire deaf squid. I forget which one, but for the last 15 years, I've been with Openreach. During that time, I've worked on superfast delivery, so BDUK delivery across the Northwest, end-to-end ownership of fibre delivery in Lancashire and Cumbria. So again, enabling some of the services that your members may have delivered and enabled through EAD, 10 gig services, etc. And then latterly, in the last couple of years, working across the civils avoidance within the PIA world and the replatforming of Openreach's planning systems onto a sort of mobile planning tool called Orion, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. So a lot of experience in network infrastructure, network build, not as much experience within the world of fixed wireless access. And that's why I'm lucky to have a pool of people that I can draw upon for knowledge and for evaluation experience. So a range of external suppliers: Farpoint, Deloitte, Arup, LA International, Certus, IA UK, and within those suppliers, a huge amount of experience. People who have built large fixed wireless access networks, radio planners, and people who, importantly, have access to the tools and equipment to scrutinize networks, fixed wireless networks, similar tools that you will of course use to design them. I'm also fortunate to have a pool of internal talent within BDUK, so Shared Rural Network, our team that are currently in the deployment of some of the first mass sites, who have a huge amount of experience in mobile telecoms and radio spectrums, and also our teams in DI, digital infrastructure, who are able to sort of influence policy. I think it's also worth noticing that on the board, we recently have Steve Unger, who have joined us, Cambridge Wireless, again, someone who's involved in the development and technology that underpins mobile communications and fixed wireless networks. So ultimately, the experience within BDUK is sufficient to understand the nature of the technology that is being proposed and to evaluate that fairly in line with the processes and the procurements that we have set out. So, Katie, if you want to roll on to the next slide. One of the things that I think provides an area of ambiguity and that is probably worth clearing up is how different, or how technology is assessed across different implementations. And I'll start with vouchers. It seems like a relatively good theme for the day. Vouchers as a sort of minimal financial adjustment or assistance, technically a micro grant, gives BDUK, and has always given BDUK, a little bit of flexibility around how how those vouchers and how the technology that sits behind them is delivered. So within vouchers, we have an approved list of equipment. That's an INCA approved list. We have a relatively low threshold for minimum speed, so 30 meg as our low speed, or double the existing. And after the voucher installation has been completed, we follow that up with a series of random post-installation audits, utilizing a company called INCA, who deliver that for us. And of the fixed wireless access audits that they've completed, you'll be pleased to know that people are remarkably happy with the service that they have received. These are people that have gone from 1 or 2 meg to a 30 meg service, a 50 meg service, or 200 meg service. So absolutely, there's stuff to be celebrated and stuff to really be sort of proud of in there. However, when we step out of vouchers and we move into the world of GIS and we look at our open market and our public reviews, we have tighter legislation and laws around subsidy control and around what we require as a product. And the biggest step is that we require, at OMR, at PR, a product of a minimum 1 gig download with a minimum 200 meg upload. And that needs to be, maintained at a minimum of 33% during busy periods, and for 20 hours out of 24, that needs to be, maintained at 95% of the headline speed. So a real sort of step up from potentially some of the products that are being offered currently via voucher interventions to where we sit with commercial and potential funded interventions. The other elements that we look for around GIS and what we want to be evidenced are, planning that ensures that as take-up nears 100%, that speed and those products will be available to everyone. And we're also very clear that it needs to be a soft upgradable intervention. So where people take lower speeds, and I'm quite aware that the market at the moment is pitched around the sort of 200 to 300 meg, be it across fiber or fixed wireless. That is the sort of price point that most aligns with people's expectations of what they currently pay or what they are willing to pay. But we require this to be a soft upgradable service. So in the view of sort of fixed wireless, this would be a point to multi-point intervention that would remain a point to multi-point intervention and wouldn't be swapped out for point-to-point technology should a customer order a 1 gig service through that system. That is the crux of where sort of soft upgradable sits within our fixed wireless world. And then ITT. So all of the stuff that sits at OMR and PR rolls up into ITT. It is essentially the same criteria that we require around technology, the same speeds, but benchmarked, wholesale benchmark pricing, physical infrastructure access, so explanation of how massed infrastructure could support up to 3 other suppliers, and then how potentially that would be managed within the world of sort of spectrum. So how is INCA's sort of good neighbour policy sufficient there that it would see everyone that was fed by that through different suppliers being able to maintain the speeds that were offered. And then finally, the OSS and BSS element, another technical element that we look at ITT, which isn't assessed so much at OMR and PR, aware of some of the systems and some of the developments around sort of asset hub and some of the hub technologies that we're seeing presented at this level, and quite sort of comfortable with those in terms of wholesale access. But yeah, ultimately, that is where the whole element sort of rolls up. So are we technology neutral? We are. But what are we looking for? We are looking for technical parity across these products. So fixed wireless access in a deployment needs to be able to deliver exactly the same level of service, of speed, of continuity, of stability as a fiber intervention would. And I mean, I've listed a sort of number of things down the right that you can read for yourselves. But I think there is a general question that's arisen around, would fixed wireless, or how is fixed wireless treated within the nature of an ITT bid? And to that, I would say that I would want to be sure that that technology had been, assured as gigabit grey and had been demonstrated as being gigabit during the OMR and the PR sort of process before I potentially utilised it within an ITT. That said, it's assessed independently of any previous submission, and therefore, we would look into that in the same level of detail and give it the same thorough check that we would at any of the other stages. So, if you want to roll on to the last slide for me, Katie. So, when it comes to evidencing technology and when it comes to some of the detail, there is, a huge amount of existing resource available, and Martin alluded to some of it earlier on around sort of general procurement as well. So at OMR, we have the RFI, so we have the Annex C, which lists the full technical requirements that BDUK requires. We have the subsidy advice, which is a worked example and gives both FWA and fibre examples of what information we would like to see provided. And then for ICT, we also have our Schedule 4 specification, which again goes into further details around example information. The principles that we're looking for when it comes to FWA, so we need detailed submissions. OMR and PR provides a bigger opportunity to provide detail because no word limit. There's no word count as you may encounter within an ITT. But it is a real opportunity to demonstrate the capability and the detail behind that technology. It needs to be location specific. So, just because it works within the centre of York doesn't mean it's going to, be suitable for a deployment in a rural location. It needs to be mapped and measured and specific to the area that it's proposed. It needs to be accessible for all. So again, especially where line of sight technologies are in use, demonstrate that actually everyone within that intervention area is able to receive the service, not just a radius drawn out from a mast. And I think that's really, really important. And again, underpinned by network capacity and financing. So ultimately, there is a different finance model that sits behind the deployment of fixed wireless access versus fibre due to sort of operational cost. And we would like to see sort of evidence of that presented. Some of the more low-level details are areas that we think we would benefit from seeing more on. So radio propagation mapping, cluster and interference models, link range and density. So how is that service going to stand up in a dense sort of rural location where you have clusters of properties versus how does it stand where you have more spread apart? Peak time capacity, resilience. So again, if it is a mesh network and it involves self-healing, is that a digital sort of process? How does that self-heal link support the full capacity of the service? Some real-world testing. So we would be absolutely delighted to see some of the theoretical claims made across fixed wireless access demonstrated in real-world environments. Chipset specifications. So again, the shortage of chips seems to be something that is resolved, but also but help us to understand the type of technology that you intend to use and how that is the correct technology for that deployment. How are access rights and how are wayleaves managed with the positioning of these devices? Is that in perpetuity? Is it in parity with pole construction for an overhead network? Those are some of the sort of key elements. So in summary, we are keen to see the continuation of fixed wireless access across the network. We recognise the value of fixed wireless access for the very hard to reach premises, but we also recognise and have funded extensively through vouchers the use of that technology in deployments today. And would look to continue to do on the same setup that we currently have. And while that provides some ambiguity between vouchers and GIS, I think it's probably the right situation. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Now, I understand that you can't take questions directly because of your sort of role in evaluating bids and so on, but I think it would be helpful to be able to discuss some or answer questions about fixed wireless access as part of the general Q&A. So, Martin, you've got colleagues. I can see obviously Matt's here. I'm not sure which other colleagues you have available to join the Q&A, but perhaps if you could use the reaction and put up your hands, then you'll all move to the top of the screen so we can see who's going to be helping to answer questions.
Yeah, just a quick one, Malcolm. A number of the questions are sort of quite specific and could lead into prejudicing the determination of some reviews that are currently in place, either be it for SQ, open market review, or other. I am happy to take a number of questions sort of away and where possible answer those to the wider group, or come back on your next call and give sort of a sanitized version. I'm just cautious around my involvement with that process.
Sure, yeah, fully understood. But we have a Q&A section next, so let's deal with the fixed wireless access questions and see if they can be at all answered or need to be taken away. I think people are going to be happy with with either of those approaches. Start with David. You had a question on fixed wireless access as part of an FTTP solution. David Cullen. You're on mute, David.
I was looking at it from an integrated solution set, Andy, and thanks for the clarity on the slides. That's very helpful. But the key point I picked up, which may well come into a detailed evaluation, but I get the evidencing gigabit capability, but the scope of that, when you go for an integrated FTTP and hybrid millimeter wave or other gigabit FWA, can be a bit of a challenge. And I'm wondering how you're going to incorporate that into this evaluation of technical parity, because obviously it can be more about technical integration than it can be against pure technical parity.
So yeah, that's a good point, and ultimately, an integrated solution is, it's more likely that an integrated solution is what BDUK is likely to be presented with, rather than a 6,000 intervention through fixed wireless alone. I think the key sits back within the sort of the OMR and the PR sort of PRs are closed, all terminology, but the OMR process, right? And also the ability to engage with BDUK outside of that formal process. Show us the real world examples where these integrated solutions are delivering the services at the sort of threshold and capacity levels that we require. And it gives us the real opportunity to sort of kick the tires on those, spend time within your sort of network operations centers and see them sort of in live action, understand what the resilience is, what the plans are, what the SLAs that sit behind those. So yeah, anywhere where commercial or funded deployment that involves that technology blend today would be beneficial for us to see for future evaluation.
Great. Okay, we'll pick that up offline with you on behalf of some clients later. That's great. Thank you.
Perfect. Cool.
Chris Taylor, you had a question as well.
So I think my first question was just about fixed wireless access, just trying to understand how many submissions you've actually received as part of the OMR process that you've accepted for gigabit capable.
So obviously there are a number of criteria that sit behind the acceptance of a solution, and our acceptance also sits across a balance of gigabit white, gigabit grey, and under review. I think that's to give an exact number. I think that would be one that I'd like to come back at a future date on.
Thank you. Stephen, you've got a question about which technologies have been assessed as being gigabit capable. Can you, Stephen, can you hear me?
Can you hear me okay, Malcolm?
Yes, we can, Stephen.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, just really what's following on that sort of question, you've done assessment. Which wireless technologies have you assessed to date? LTE, 5G, millimeter wave, 6 gigahertz?
So we've assessed a range of technologies. So those include the use of 60 gigahertz spectrum, but also the planned deployment of 5G and 5G NR technologies. Key element of this isn't just the technology, but it's the technology in the area where it's intended to be used and how that aligns to delivery and to the unique geographical sort of situation and circumstances of that area. Again, we haven't got a this is fixed wireless and this is the only type of fixed wireless variant that we all accept. We are looking for evidence and demonstration of any technology across that licensed spectrum, unlicensed spectrum, where the speed, capability, and thresholds can be met. And I know, Steve, we're working with yourselves to sort of try and pull some more information specifically into the current OMR.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. James, I want to turn to you. You and David have both asked questions in the chat concerning Type C call-offs or the Type C contract. Do you want to just ask your question?
Yeah, obviously the Type C is something of a concern to quite a few operators. I'm keen to understand exactly how the process works because I've been working with clients who were expecting to be developing Type B or even a mix of Type B and Type A procurements in some of the areas that have now been identified under the PPME for Type C and possibly the first call off. So just as we were sort of developing the possible sort of bid scenarios for Type A and B, suddenly we're told, no, these are no longer. So including, shall we say, the specific one, Mid Wales, part of the PPME being undertaken by Wales at the moment, suddenly has been kind of taken out of that. So I wonder what's the process for saying, and if we see, yes, they're in that PPME for the Type C, does that mean they're no longer on the table for a Type B and Type A procurement? Where is the competition between the Type C framework holder and the rest of the market?
I'll come in on that, James. We have carried out public reviews of the entire country. We have established where there is and where there is not appetite for Type A's and Type B's. As I said, actually, we have 4 Type A's and B's than we initially thought we would have. So we go through that process with A's and B's first before we consider Type C. Those areas that go into Type C are those where we have found there to be no effective competition, and we therefore don't expect them to be delivered any other way. So that's why we end up with the intervention areas we currently have. However, it is currently in pre-procurement market engagement, and so I would encourage anyone who has plans to go there, or would do so in another, with another intervention, to feed into that process. But we have assessed the market. We're not. Our presumption isn't Type C first; it's Type C last.
I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding in terms of that engagement. I mean, I don't want to cause too much sort of issues in terms of being too specific, but certainly some of those in the Type C PPME and proposed first call off, there is significant interest from some of my clients in terms of participating at Type B, or multiple Type B or Type A.
Then I hope, James, that that they have fed into the PPME process, because otherwise we don't know. We don't know if we're not told.
Indeed, I can't get. I think, like I said, I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding. I think the expectation was, if the PPME came out looking okay, people just looked at it and think, yeah, I'll bid for that when it comes up, and no further action, so to speak. Whereas we're now seeing that it perhaps needs to be interpreted rather differently.
Okay, thank you. David, you also asked the question in the chat about a similar sort of issue. Does that satisfy your question as well? Or?
Can I just answer the other question, part of James' about assessing value for money? We have a very clear benchmarking process for how much things should cost and what we expect supplier contributions to be, and we won't be accepting anything that we don't consider to meet our value for money criteria, in the same way we wouldn't for any of the interventions.
I mean, there is a specific problem actually, in that some of the areas in that PPME, there is probably only one independent operator who would be interested. And for some of that, well, let's be specific. Your 2 Type A contracts in Cornwall, and there's a bit in between those. It would take a very brave altnet, other than the winner of the 2 Type A's, to bid for that gap in the middle. Everyone knows. You look at that and you think, oh yeah, not wishing to be rude. Wilderness won the bits to the west and the bits to the east. There's a bit in the middle, which is about the size of a Type A. Who else is going to bid for it? But because there is only that one bidder, potentially it's taken away and immediately given to somebody else because there's only that one bidder. That is a concern. I'm wondering, how can we actually balance those two up to make something that is competitive and ensures value for money?
But if there were interest from others in the area, we would be putting it out as a Type A.
But because of where we've got to now, Like those in Cornwall, we've got the bit to the west has been awarded to Wildernet. The bit then sort of east of that has been awarded to Wildernet. There's a gap in the middle with about
I think we're getting
10,000
very, very specific now, James, and I think we need to move on.
But it's, you know, it's quite important. I don't know what solution. Yeah, we're not hearing other solutions for those sorts of areas. So you know, that's why we end up where we do.
But, Tim, you've got your hand up now.
I noticed Matt had his hand up first, so perhaps we'll just bring Matt in.
Yeah.
No, I only had my hand up because you said put your hand up so we're at the top of the list.
Yeah,
okay, that's no problem. Okay, so just picking up on those two last bits, I think this is where the gap is appearing, isn't it? I mean, Martin, if I follow your logic, then you're saying there's no effective competition in West Surrey, which you're moving straight to a type C, but we know there are multiple altnets building in West Surrey. But if you ask them for their build plans and then you only accept what they built and say, we don't trust that you're going to build any more than that, then inevitably you're going to see a gap in the build plans. Those operators have lost faith in BDUK because you're saying you don't trust them. They're hardly going to spend hundreds of £1,000s putting in a bid if you don't trust them.
But we're not saying only if you have built, well, we accept that they've been built, or that they will be built.
I won't get into specifics, but I know of an example where only stuff that has been built has been accepted.
Okay.
All I can say on that is, you know, we carry out the assessment that we do on the OMR data, and if the evidence isn't provided, that gives us sufficient assurance that it will be built within the next 3 years.
Matt Smith,
I take your point earlier about, you know, loosening the rope a little, but you know, with the criteria that we currently apply, we have to draw a line.
But you won't see the competition if you refuse to see it.
Matt Smith has got a similar point made in the chat. Do you want to speak to that, Matt? I'm not sure. I can't quite see you. Matt Smith, that is.
Oh, hi guys. Is that the point around the South Yorkshire lot? I've put a couple in.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so I mean, that, for me, that was a classic example. You look at that, and it's about 35,000 premises in there, of which 20,000 are in a public realm, publicly available commercial plan for a very, very credible supplier. And I think the justification is that timeline. So okay, it might not be delivered in 3 years, but it probably will within 4. It definitely will within 5. And the justification then for bringing those areas into a type B with heavy subsidy just seems bizarre.
Well, it's not been launched yet, South Yorkshire. It's in
granted, I accept that, but you know, the fact they're in there.
Matt, how can you say it's definitely going to be done in 5 years, though? I mean,
well, you can't. But look, a lot of these procurements, because you're looking at the funds, you acknowledge that a lot of these procurements aren't going to deliver 100% of the intervention areas. So why put a greater risk on the the bottom percentiles of those intervention areas by subsidising areas which are clearly going to be delivered by a credible supplier? It just seems bizarre. I think the other point I'd make on that one is actually some of those areas probably would be delivered by somebody else if they weren't in the public realm of a commercial plan of a very credible supplier. So it's not that they are not commercially viable; they absolutely are commercially viable. It just seems bizarre that you put them into an ITT.
Okay. David, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's just to follow on, I mean, from really James's point as well, just to understand, because I think Martin, we can understand. We think maybe there is a confusion between where deferred scope plays into this, because I think the point from my question that hasn't been answered yet is, from our perspective, and a lot of INCA members and certainly Prism clients' views, that deferred scope is something that could be done within the time frame, and therefore it's in that box of maybe category. And if that's the case, we're confused as to how a type C definition could come out before the type B or A procurement contract has actually been awarded, maybe even built. But I recognise that the timescale if we go to build, but surely we can't issue a type C until we know what really is going to be included in the contract for a type A or B. And similarly, it doesn't encourage and incentivize a supplier, if they're running into a type A or B, to look at alternative innovative solutions, whatever, to expand commercially into that space over time. If already they're being locked out and type C accelerates beyond where you've currently got the type A and type B timescales. So we're a bit confused as how deferred scope works with initial scope across type B and type C, because it doesn't kind of match at the moment for us.
But they don't overlap.
Yeah.
But surely they will. I mean, what we've seen, and maybe total confusion then, but what we've seen within the type C PPMEs are areas that could be done further out if a type B did come up. And it goes back to this point about where are we pushing the envelope.
Okay. So in effect you're saying, why don't we sit back a little longer and see how things go?
David, you're seeing areas in market engagement for type B and also in type C at the same time. These procurement, these contracts shouldn't overlap. For Cumbria, for example, we signed the type B contract there. There is a deferred scope. In a number of years, we will have to make a decision about which of those premises, if any, need to be included in the contracts. But it isn't the case that whatever doesn't get built by Fibrous there, OpenReach do under type C, and that shouldn't happen elsewhere.
That contract.
Or whoever.
Or whoever.
Or whoever wins that contract. Yeah. Well, sorry.
Lloyd, we have one more question from Lloyd. We've got time for one more.
Thank you. I just think that it's just a comment more than a question. If you listen to the debate, it must appear obvious to everyone, except perhaps the department itself, who has this political imperative that it has to operate to, that some of the incentives that you've put in place have worked very, very well, and are truly encouraging growth of network deployments. They genuinely are in the right way, but others, and clearly what's coming represents an enormous distortion of what would otherwise be a very healthy commercial market. And you are using a policy that simply is no longer appropriate to the way the market has changed since the Gigabit program was first launched. And it just, for me, it beggars belief that you're taking all of this industry that is driven by entrepreneurs and SMEs that are demonstrating growth and success. Of course, there are some market failures in that. Of course there are. But when you group it all together and then we run the policy that we're running, it seems to me completely at odds with everything that the government should be supporting. It's causing market distortion. And for me, I just don't understand why there isn't it just seems that the snowball is rolling and nothing can stop it. And it just seems ridiculous. And that's my statement on it, really, more than a question.
Well, thank you for the statement, Lloyd. I don't know if there's any reaction.
I'm looking at Martin.
I mean, do you want to come in? No, I mean, look. So I hear you, Lloyd, and I have now been in BDUK for a little over a year. I am aware of the feelings of INCA members towards OpenReach. I will come back to the fact that we believe that there are areas which we have tested where we don't believe there is effective competition, and that is why we are progressing with this type C. And yes, we do have a political imperative to cover as many premises as quickly as we possibly can using a range of interventions, but still incredibly reliant on the incredible kind of work that all of you have done over the last few years and will be doing over the coming years. I honestly do not think that Type C is a threat to you. I know you don't buy this, but I just don't think it's the case. It is not an enormous part of the market, and it's a part of the market that we have yet to find there to be alternative, interest from people to build. So that's kind of my reply back, I guess. I don't know, Matt, if you'd add anything to that.
I just cut across, if I may, Martin. I just want to be clear. My comment is not exclusive to Type C. As I said, there's been some very good interventions, and some of them I think we all support. But my comment was not exclusively about C. It's certainly about others too.
Okay, well, look, we're just running into our break now.
Sorry, Matt, I took your space.
We'll be able to return to these discussions a little bit later. So we'll give ourselves just 5 minutes. We'll be back, please, by 14:52, 14:53. So got a couple of minutes off, and then we'll start and move on into the next section, which is about actually how you put together bids. So thank you very much.
And I think we are dropping off at this point.
Well, thank you very much for your participation. That's been very, very helpful and useful. And obviously, this is one of a series of engagements that we have with you as INCA collectively. And no doubt we will be welcoming you back very, very soon. So thank you very much.
Anytime.
Yeah, thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Right, welcome back, everyone. I think it's time to start again. It's not all doom and gloom, of course. We do have some very good news, which is that the only people who've won any of the BD UK contracts so far have been altnets, mostly INCA members, which is tremendous. And in the next section, we've got two of the people who've been asking, who've been assisting with putting together some of those bids to speak about how you actually structure your bids in a way that's going to succeed. I know there are concerns about Type C and the interplay between different types of procurement and intervention. I think we clearly can address those concerns during the rest of the course of the afternoon. But I think it is also worth focusing on the fact that there is actually some quite good news from quite a number of people, and that those organisations that have won bids are often very, very pleased with the way that BD UK has performed and treated them. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of that fact in the discussion we're having about some of the interventions which are a little bit more challenging. But I think I'll hand over to James and to David to talk about structuring bids. I'm not quite sure how you want to play this. Shall we start with, we'll start with James, I think. No, wrong way, start with David.
James is shaking his head. We probably agreed to do it the other way around, Malcolm. So
right, sorry, apologies.
There's no problem. Really only because I think, we've both James and I have obviously got very similar views on this in terms of how it's come forwards, but I've got a couple of positioning slides which we'll use to springboard off together. So for those who don't know me, David Cullen, I'm the Managing Director of Prism Business Consulting. We've been active in the sector for a very long time, longer than my grey hairs probably given rise to. But the truth is that recently, as we've been expanded, well, we haven't expanded, we've grown into a space of working both with investors as well as altnets, as well as with public sector authorities. And we have a strong track record and history in understanding public procurement. So we've been very active with a number of altnet providers, particularly in not just supporting the production of bids, but also understanding what they should bid for and how to qualify, because we've actually helped certain altnets consciously, deliberately qualify out of certain areas, as well as a number of them gone in, and I won't mention names for obvious reasons. But what we wanted to start off with was actually understanding where a bid comes from, and in essence the chronology and how important it is. So Katie, I'm going to say you've got the slides up. If you just jump to the first slide, because one of the most important things to bear in mind before we even look at a bid is that the bid is the last stage of a very long process. And if, as an altnet, you're looking at a procurement and thinking of it as a sales opportunity, you've probably lost already. Now, I say that quite convincingly and harshly because it's generally true. BDUK consider the bid to be the last point in a very long process, as you can see there. And you've got some indications of kind of indicative timescales that they have for each one of these stages below. But if you just do a quick sum, you've actually got 32 weeks of activity before what could be an 8 to 26 week, depending whether it's type A, type B or whatever, and how long further final negotiation takes for the bid itself, with a significant dwell time happening between each one of those stages in certain situations. And the important thing is, as far as BDUK is concerned, when you get to the ITT, everybody should know what it's actually about, starting with the OMR, the Open Market Review, which determines the scope. So if we're not in there helping to determine that scope, we're losing a trick. The public review, which therefore fundamentally is there to gain the input and the awareness of the various options around it to shape what the ITT and bid looks like. And again, if we're not engaged there, we're missing a trick. Right into what they call the PPME, the pre-procurement market engagement. In every other bit of public sector procurement, that's called the soft market testing stage, where the majority of the action actually happens. So if you could just build the slide for us, Katie, onto the next bit. This is the important factor. Plan your process, plan the process, structure the plan, don't structure the bid, because your sales window as an altnet is not the bid. The sales window is actually the OMR, because that's where the scoping and positioning happens. It's the PR and leading into the PPME, because that's where the influencing and negotiating happens. And that's where you actually pitch where you are, what you've got, what you plan to do, and how you plan to do it. And if you haven't got that message across before the bid even comes out, frankly, we would say probably don't go there, because the bid is not a sales proposal, which we're all more commonly used to based upon the kind of nature of the business as we are. What it is a straightforward exam, and it needs to be considered as an exam. Just move on for us, Katie, if you could. So just to kind of tee up the session, we've got, I've just listed 3 fundamental hints and tips, which we as Prism always kind of use with, with the clients which we've been talking to around how you go into these. The first one, and it's a really important place to start, is don't be a grant junkie. If you're looking at going into any of the GIS activity, vouchers are different, obviously, because they're demand side, but any supply side intervention, particularly anything under the GIS scheme, don't be enticed by the subsidy as a way of purely expanding your operations. It won't work. You get sucked into a world of looking at grant as opposed to how commercially you should be building this in the first place. So use a subsidy to aggregate density and demand and requirements together, typical type A, expand the scope of what you're currently doing in your existing business plans, some type A and probably type Bs, and qualify in only when it extends what you're looking to do already, based upon where you are already, what you're delivering to the market already. And therefore ensure that what you're doing with the subsidy scheme is complementing your existing plan, not distracting or distorting it. We've seen that happen too often, and it's too big a resource drain on your business for it to, especially if it comes up as a distortion or a distraction, which leads on to the final point there, which is about picking your battles. Given what we've just heard and given what we know from the speed that BDUK have now picked up the accelerated pace to, it will become very resource heavy if you don't seriously think about how it's fitting into your existing plans rather than distorting and throwing all your resource away. And as James and I both say as evil consultants, your only other alternative is simply to buy in external help with those. But that's not going to help if it doesn't complement your business plan. So number 1, don't be a grant junkie. Number 2, Katie, you could just build. There's a reason why I've got the rugby picture up, and that's because of these next 2. The second one being mind the gap. GIS is essentially still gap funding. So from the OMR stage onwards, you really need to be aware and clear about your commercial affordability thresholds, how far you would go commercially, and therefore how far a subsidy would expand your capabilities under this business case. Yeah, and if you do that, then you're in the right place, because you've got your own mindset right before you then look at it from a subsidy perspective. And then develop what you would like to do as if it were your own commercial network, using your own tools, first of all, not necessarily BDUK's templates, because you're used to the way you build networks, you're used to your own business plans. If you put that in play, you know where you would go, and therefore you would know why financially what's being asked for is too much of a stretch. So if you then apply that in terms of coverage, recognizing BDUK's measure is getting as near as 100% of the scope as possible, and you can look at your own architectures and work out how you innovate to actually get further. Once you've done that, then translate it into the myriad of BDUK templates within the bid, because then the gap between what you do commercially and what BDUK can offer you through the subsidy is clear to you, not to BDUK. Because BDUK templates are designed from the other end, quite rightly. You need to look at it from a commercial end and extend. And then just the last one, Katie, thank you. Is, I mentioned it already, but as a real, and it's a real major hint that we see this all the time. The bid, when you get there, is an exam, not a sales proposal. Too often, what we do is we pitch ourselves based upon what we know we can do. And it's the wrong way round to answer an exam question. You've got to treat it as an exam. And literally, we recommend to all of our clients, you actually do this. Number one, you ask all the questions before the exam gets answered you possibly can. Use clarifications, not just at the bid stage, that's again slightly too late, but all the way through, particularly from PR stage and PPME, so that you understand what it is they want and they understand exactly what it is that you're going to offer. And what we use, a common PRISM tool we play with is what we call the Scrum, and the BDUK one-to-one sessions throughout the whole process, are a great opportunity to look, to use Scrum. Suppliers check of requirements understanding meetings. Get involved, tease out those points before you ever get anywhere near the bid. Be clear, obviously, about the rules, and it's quite easy to quite often forget that, and have your own pre-populated templates. I mean, Tim mentioned this earlier in terms of the SSQs, the standard selection questionnaires, and the standard selection answers for those. You can build up a library of that information, which just gets dropped into every bid. And that's part of a public procurement approach. And it's a smart way to do it, because then you get an awful lot of the bid produced easily, and you can focus on the bits that really make the difference. And always RTFQ and ATFQ. You can choose your own definition of F, but RT and Q and AT and Q mean read the question and answer the question. Do not put in more than it asks you. Do not put in less than it asks you, but be precise about answering the exam question, because that's what you get evaluated on. And we actually also recommend, just for keeping with that exam analogy, to do mock exams, maybe before the bid comes out as well, if there's time, because there's less pressure, but certainly in the final stage of your submissions, run it as a mock exam. Remark your own homework, remark your own exams, maybe with an independent examiner. And obviously that's another space where, as consultants, we can come in and assist dramatically with our experience from another objective viewpoint. But it's really important to do that. It's really important to consider it as an exam. And they're the real 3 hints and tips that I'd like to segue into in terms of what they do. So thank you, Katie. Just flip on to the next one and then over to James, really.
Let's go on to James now. And you're on mute, James.
In that case, Katie, can we have the previous slide? I'm going to be terrible and steal some of David's slides. The one before that. That's the one. There's so much of what David said that I agree with completely, but where's the fun in that? So little couple of points on this one. The bid is not the end. You've got another 2 to 5 years of building it. You've got another 7 years under contract of operating it. Never forget that. Be careful what you bid for. What I would say, very much in supporting what sort of David said, though, is that sort of middle bit that around before the bid, before the ITT. Project Gigabit is different from the Superfast program in that it's being very much managed nationally by BD UK. And that means that the local authorities are quite sort of pushed out of that process, and all the local political stakeholders are pushed out of that process. Slightly oddly, that can make BD UK quite nervous and leave them in a very difficult position, because if they make a decision that is not supported locally, they know they've got problems. So if you can get your local stakeholders on side and very clearly but subtly have that message going to BD UK, if this is the answer, then we're quite happy with this as being a local supplier or whatever. Having that clear local support is going to be really very important in just making sure that there's one of the sort of the issues that BD UK is concerned about isn't a concern for them. And this is the whole sort of issue around sort of pre-tendering, is looking at those issues that BD UK and others are going to be concerned about, and kind of like making sure that they're not there. So what are the two big terrors in public procurement? One, no one will turn up. That you're terrified that they're going to be doing a procurement and no one will actually bid for it. It really doesn't look good. So make it clear that you can support the procurement and try to get that into your own way. And the other fear then is, oh yeah, people have turned up, someone's going to challenge it. Just make sure there's kind of no challenge for these things. I think that's the main issue. Some of this, it is difficult. These bids, there's absolutely no, there's no hiding the fact. Taking part in these bids is a major undertaking. For goodness sake, get some help. Other consultants are available. PAG, Notable, there are others who know what they're talking about. Make sure you get some support and do this. One of the things that I think it was Lloyd said about sort of SMEs taking part in these, the consultants have a lot more experience of doing these than Openreach do. Openreach have not taken part in a single Project Gigabit submission as far as we're aware. So, you can, all of the winners have been INCA members so far. It is possible. It is very important. David said, don't be a grant junkie. Well, perhaps that's true, but be in no doubt how important this is. This is, in a sense, a run-up to consolidation. We're all looking forward to, if that's the phrase, consolidation. It is going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people. Having a few tens of millions of BD UK money on your side won't go amiss. I think any questions now?
Yeah.
Yes. Do we have any immediate questions to James or to David, or if not immediately, we can save them up to the end of the session.
Just to add, while people are thinking or dropping something in, just to kind of obviously reinforce what James is saying as well. And the other thing that the external support is very important for is understanding public sector procurement. Most of us, for exactly the reasons we've, both James and I have said, we understand that we're actually in a market of entrepreneurs. And quite often there's been virtually nil to virtually no exposure of public sector procurement. And to be completely honest, BD UK aren't always the wisest people about public sector procurement themselves. So engaging with people, like ourselves who have done this almost for a living, sadly, for quite some time, can really help, because actually, without wanting to wrong foot BD UK, we can gently and politely guide them with you into the right space, which fits for what they really want.
Stephen, you've got a question before we move on.
Yeah, it actually relates to my previous question. So just for David and James, have you been involved in any process where people put wireless in? And what's your experience in that process?
Start with David first.
I have several. I mean, personally, from my experience, 9net engaged with both fixed wireless access and fixed fixed networks when when you were running 9 again via Prism. And since then we have advised some other clients in terms of how they integrate fixed wireless in with FTTP, hence my question earlier, Stephen. And I'm not sure if you'd like me to give away other confidences about our clients, but I'm happy to if you.
No, it's just more of a general question.
Sure.
Yeah. James, you've got something.
Yes, I have been involved in putting together FWA bids. My experience of it, not happy. I can't really, I don't want to go into any details, but I don't think it's handled well. I'm afraid I have to say at the moment, I would discourage any one from having FWA as a part of a bid for a Type A or Type B procurement under Project Gigabit, because I think, from what I've seen, it leaves you very vulnerable. Their expectation is full fibre. That's what this is aimed to achieve. I think that's, in my personal view, is, how can we put it, a shame. I think we are missing a big trick in having fixed wireless access a part of the solution. I think fixed wireless access has to be a part of the solution. But then again, having ways to encourage as much fibre as possible, as far as possible, perhaps that's not a bad thing. Helen.
I think, sorry, just got back in on that. I think I agree with James. The BDUK's track record right now of understanding fixed wireless access sufficiently has not been great at all in this, at all. But I was quite encouraged by some of the things Andy Murphy said, because they've actually now this afternoon laid down rules that we can then apply and play back to them really, really well. And it comes down to them not really understanding that FWA has moved on dramatically. When you look at millimeter wave, 60 gig, 80 gig, particularly, all of which are just as consistent, if not better, than some current fibre offerings. And I think we can play that back in and change that map, change that game. But
we're running a little over time, so I just want to turn to Helen. Thank you, Helen.
Okay, so can I make one proposal about this? We're a hybrid operator here in Cornwall and Devon. We are at the moment going to approach BSI to get accreditation for our GFWA offering. And the reason I'm coming at it from this angle is because I don't think the decision on what technology is applied comes from DCMS or from BDUK. It's dictated elsewhere within the infrastructure of government. And that's just from my own experience. I have a background working for BEIS in the past. Right. So I think we potentially, as a group, as INCA, would do better to come together and get BSI standard approval for GFWA and any other technology we should think should be in the bid, to present that then back through the CSAs, which are basically the people who guide the government on technical solutions, and that will allow BDUK and DCMS to then positively receive them. I think it's outside their remit. So I've got that call set up with BSI, and I am quite happy to be open about what Paddy, who I think you know better probably than myself, will find out from that call. It's taking place in the next 2 weeks. But that, I think, is the only way that we're going to get it on the list, because I think it's outside of their control, just from my own experience and the information and data that I've covered. I don't think that's helpful, but it's just where I think it is in terms of people's understanding on wireless.
I'm sure an awful lot of people would be very interested in your experience and seeing how that process can unfold. Thank you very much. Let's move on. Wholesale access is one of the components of the requirements under BDUK programs, except for vouchers. So I think let's, first of all, the way we've got this section structured really is for James to give a quick gallop through some of the wholesale requirements or the list of wholesale requirements that exist, and then follow that up with some practical examples of people who are actually doing things around wholesale and able to support different operators. So James, would you like to kick us off? We don't have too long.
Okay, right. I'll go through this very, very quickly. There was recently a BDUK webinar on this, and very thoughtfully they sent the slides. So we're just going to run through some of that and just very quickly. Oh, I've just got a message from Katie saying that we've only got the slides that I'm going to look at. This is from a bigger pack of slides, so I'm just picking out a few, but there is more information there. So next slide, please, Katie. Right, technical and specification. You are required to provide wholesale access for gigabit capable. Now, one of the things you need to bear in mind about this, BD UK is not here to support the altnet industry in expanding their businesses. They're here to try and get ubiquitous coverage for gigabit capable connection across the UK. So it is a slightly different requirement that they're after, and they are bound by basically international law. Next slide, please. Okay, so open access network, you need to be able to provide the open access, and it needs to be gigabit capable. This maintain capability is an important part, and this is actually one of the biggest challenges of creating a bid and creating the infrastructure you need there. So, and there is a problem here. There's a sort of a conflict in that you have to design your network to meet the target premises that you're given, and to serve those target premises with gigabit capable broadband. You then need to maintain that capacity over time and make it available on a sort of free basis. But the capacity of that is a significant question. So just how much capacity you have to provide is a big problem that we actually haven't entirely resolved yet. Next question, please. Next slide, please, Katie. Right, they're still working on this basic sort of model of how things work. This is still, shall we say, rather similar to an FTTC model in terms of its sort of basic construction, but obviously we've just got that FTTP part of it. So that's what the concept of the infrastructure is all based around, everything working from the sort of the data centers through telephone exchanges through a standard PIA type infrastructure onto the home. Forget the wireless bit at the bottom, in my opinion. Next slide, please. Right. Duct access, and this is important. The majority of operators are looking to do this using PIA. And here is one of your interesting sort of get outs that I think everyone's starting to understand now. If you use PIA, well, that's kind of not your infrastructure, so you don't have to, provide any further access to that. That comes as part of the PIA product. Where one of the problems about using PIA are the problems with it. So congested ducts, that sort of thing, where you have to work around. If that workaround is less than 1 kilometre and less than £50,000, actually it should be all less than £50,000, then you don't have to give access to it, and that can be a significant benefit too. Next slide, please. Similarly on pole, if you're just inserting a single pole where there are problems with it, then again, you don't have to give access to that. You do have to give access to 3 alternative providers. You can see that there is a problem there, because if you're working along and you find one pole that's not able to be used, then one of the things you can do is put your own pole in, and you don't have to give anyone access to that. So the next person coming along, which may even be OpenReach, they can't use your pole, so another one goes in, and so we end up with this bizarre forest of extra poles. I'm hoping that isn't going to happen. Next slide, please, before we dwell on it too much. Dark fiber is the potential problem in all of this, I think. So although you don't have to give access to duct over the PIA infrastructure, where you're installing new fiber, you do need to give access to dark fiber on a sort of equal basis. you need to make access to 3 additional users. Now we'll take a look at that actually. Next slide. Yeah. So this is potentially what it could look like. You've got at the top there, you need 1 duct with 1 fiber going along it, and that's all you need. If you take this idea that you have to give access to 3 additional providers of the duct and 3 additional providers for the fiber, you end up with this apparently bizarre idea where you have to install 4 times as much infrastructure as you need to serve the project. That is not true. The overall capacity of this only needs to be sufficient to serve the target premises that you've got there. How you then actually allocate that infrastructure is another matter. You do need to be able to give access to it, but you should not be over installing the capacity of this. Now, clearly, you don't want to install less capacity than is required. There's always this issue under state aid that's been going since, well, a long time. Basically, if you're putting duct in and if you're putting fiber in, put in plenty, because it's never going to come to waste. But you don't, you won't be funded for putting in excess capacity. Next slide. Nicely complicated. The point of this is that you don't necessarily need to put in more than is required at the start. So there is this issue for cabinets where you need large cabinets to give access to other people. It's well accepted that you do not need to do that at the outset, and that you can then upgrade as long as there is a capability to upgrade the space in those cabinets. So when anybody will want it, then that's acceptable. The cost of doing that and how that will work will vary, and there are different ways of handling that. Next slide. Okay, so that before that was dealing mostly with the passive infrastructure. There is also the issue of the active infrastructure, and here you have a number of requirements, and these are causing some confusion in the market at the moment. So you need to be able to provide what they're calling sort of white label access from basically your data center, and then you need to provide bitstream access at a local handover point. That may be the telephone exchange or the street cabinet. If you do that, then you also need to be able to provide bitstream access backhaul back to the data center. So you have to have a number of products that you provide through these routes. They will then be benchmarked, and this is where we end up with all sorts of confusion, because you can benchmark the local access against OpenReach. OpenReach pricing is the sort of the standard for sort of local access bitstream. You can use either their standard pricing or Equinox pricing. Equinox is a point in the market, so you can use that, and that is important because if you think about it, that means we're taking Equinox pricing right out into the rural delivery, and that's going to affect the entire market, which is why, as I said before, Project Gigabit is kind of important. What you'll then find is that some of the products for national access to symmetrical products, well, OpenReach don't provide that. So you're then looking more at GigaClear and Fibrous for their pricing, which is wildly different from Equinox pricing at the moment. So there are problems. Basically, benchmarking is going to be a whole host of clarification questions and a difficult process. But hopefully, as we stumble further and further through Project Gigabit, then it will all become a bit clearer, and sort of later winners will all find it a lot simpler. I think that's about all I've got to say. Is there one more slide? Yeah. So yeah, this is to basically to say, yes, you have benchmarking. There are a whole load of issues in terms of SLAs and so on that need to be considered in terms of the benchmarking. So that was a very, very quick run through this. I suggest we check with BD UK and make the full slide pack available. If we can't, I don't see there being any objection to that. Malcolm, I don't know if you've got any time for questions or not.
Well, I think it might be worthwhile just giving a couple of minutes of questions, although we are slightly over time now. Quick question from me. You mentioned Equinox pricing. So is Equinox, the Equinox 2 pricing being built in, or the Equinox 1 pricing in terms of BD UK?
Well, oddly, I think it depends what you want to do. There's an argument for going either way. I think Equinox 1 is somewhat, shall we say, more likely at the moment, and Equinox 2 is seen as, oh, let's not make that a done deal just yet. So I think just Equinox 1.
Any immediate questions to James? If not, we'll move on. Tom asked if the slides are being made available, and I'm assuming we're making the slides available after the webinar. That's what we normally do with these things. So let's move on now to the three speakers we've got talking about meeting wholesale requirements and different approaches that can be taken to that. And we'll start with Toby. So Toby, hello.
Thanks, Malcolm. I'm conscious. I'll catch you up some time here, I think. As you said, from our point of view, we're working with some of the winners and the applicants. And I think rather than just give you some kind of tawdry sales pitch, I wanted to share some of the challenges that we have seen in the marketplace at the moment, and just kind of leave some thoughts that we might be able to discuss a bit later on. So if you do the next slide, Casey, I think, there is a question about what kind of wholesale you want to provide. And David touched on it earlier, which is, whether your Project Gigabit applications should be taking you in directions that you are not naturally planning to go. And I think we see this challenge with some of the folks that are making the applications around wholesale, because, it could taste nice to your friends and family. And they're going to say, with some sprinkles on top, we'll call it wholesale products, and that's fantastic. But the reality is, you're going to want to sell it. And as has been alluded to by a lot of the other speakers, the actual details of it and making it into a product that people are actually interested in purchasing takes a little bit more effort. So I think we see this kind of wholesale, we need to put it in there for Project Gigabit application, but then we're stuck in this position, which is, we actually haven't got a very pretty production at the end of it. So if you do the next slide, Katie, what we see in terms of the key ingredients of approaching wholesale from a successful perspective is actually, the key thing we find is the people. And that is to say, the people in your organization who are tasked with bringing something to life from a wholesale point of view. It's not just product people, because obviously that is important, but it's also the resources that stretch down through the other activities that are required for you to bring something to market that is compelling from a wholesale point of view. And we see things like business processes, immature business processes around things like CRM, for example. So wholesale and GDPR, these aren't your customers. You can't store their data necessarily unless you have that as an arrangement with your retail partners. So what kind of business processes, where are you at the moment in terms of the thought process that sits behind actually delivering a wholesale service? Obviously the systems and technology, I mean, from our point of view, we find we're interested in the end of this, and I'll come on to that in a second, but the system and the technology around the OSS and BSS, that needs to be in place, right? You can't kick off an order if you don't have a system to receive the order into, and the set of business processes that sit behind the receipt of that order that allow you to actually roll it out. And then from our point of view, and we've touched on it previously, the product, i.e. the actual wholesale products that you want to offer. And we see different thinking, but it would be fair to say that we don't see many customer organizations that are looking at for 100 megabit product at a wholesale level. So what products do you have that are really going to be attractive? And then how are customers going to contract with you for it? And what are the SLAs that sit around it? So Casey, if you go on to the next one, we have experienced a kind of journey, if you will, which is that most altnet operators are in the passing homes category of having received money and desperately trying to dig things. And I think with Project Gigabit, that's particularly true because the awards are only relatively recent. We then see the next stage of the kind of evolution is that they start trying to sign up their customers. And that can be easier or more difficult depending on where you are, but there's a focus that goes into that. And then subject to how successful you are about your customer signups, the wholesale piece comes along next. And people can build wholesale portals. It's not an impossible thing to do, but they'll find that not a large number of customers are that interested in connecting to your wholesale portal, which then leads us to where we play, which is the aggregation part of it, which is if you're going to advertise your services as being available, they may as well be alongside other people whose services are available in order to get the biggest number of eyeballs, right, the biggest demand into that. So next slide, Katie, we've got, from our point of view, from a wholesale platform perspective, we really answer 3 questions. So one about service availability, one about order management, and then the one about fault management, which is often overlooked, but actually we've spoken in the past about how wholesale customers might be able to troubleshoot their retail customers across your network. And that needs to be something that's in your thought processes in terms of how that's going to work. So yeah, from our perspective, the idea is that you connect once as a network to provide those capabilities, and then service providers can connect into the platform and take advantage of the fact that they can see your offering. Next slide, Katie. So it's probably worth pointing out, but not all customers are the same. And we sort of see this kind of elephant hunting mentality, which is the only types of customers that are worth having are the big ones. Maybe that's true. I mean, certainly the early man was definitely more interested in woolly mammoths than they were in squirrels. But fundamentally, if we're going to try and attract customers, we need to kind of be clear as to what types of customers we're going after. And I think, yeah, from our point of view, next slide, Katie, the smaller customers don't have the capabilities or necessarily the will or even the volumes to justify trying to build themselves into your network. So it's kind of important that you're able to provide them with some kind of interface, web interface, where they can place orders. We're aware of, shall we say, large scale sales operations that are able to sign up lots of customers, but there is a big gap between getting a customer to say that they're willing to be connected to your network and actually getting them connected to your network and invoicing. And that's magnified when it comes to wholesale. So we see that obviously for the smaller guys, we probably need to have some kind of visual interface so that they don't have to put a lot of effort into, but can place orders. And then the next slide, Casey, talks about the API side of it and how larger customers can connect at a sort of machine to machine level. I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about it. There's definitions about APIs. We've seen some operators standing up their own portals, and technically an API can be anything you like. You will have heard of TM Forum compatibility, standardization. We can get very lost in some of these terms. Our platform is actually based on something called Open Network API, which was developed in Sweden. But I think some form of common language to find out about the availability and those sorts of things is an important next step. The final thing that I just wanted to mention from our point of view, if we looked at the final slide, Casey, which is to do with the one-touch switching, because we speak to lots of people about this, and it's probably worth, from our point of view, we've looked at this many different ways, including offering to build a platform unsuccessfully, I may add. And I think the challenge for us from a wholesale perspective is that one-touch switching is all about retail. So it's all about the end user customers and their movement in short order between networks. So it's not something from our perspective that we have a huge amount to say about. If we think back to the OSS BSS part of the ingredients that we need to do wholesale, those things need to be in place. And it's likely that most retail operators will have put something in place at CRM level to handle these sort of switching requirements that are going to come from the one-touch switching process. At a wholesale level, it is our job to make it as easy as possible. And we really see one-touch switching as a cease or a new provide that comes through the wholesale platform and would be kicked off by a standard sales process that would happen inside an organization. So just from our perspective, we don't see there being some obvious overlap for us to be offering one-touch switching solutions. That's it.
Thank you very much, Toby. That's really very helpful. Let's move on to Rob, who will sort of take a slightly different perspective from Asset Hub, looking at more of the physical assets as opposed to the service layer.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm. Yeah, hi everyone. Rob Lander, Director of Asset Hub. First slide, please, Katie. So Asset Hub really is not to do with wholesale broadband, but it's to do with wholesale everything else pretty much, and a lot of the things that James was talking about earlier from a BDUK perspective. Why is that important? Well, there are an awful lot of assets and an awful lot of asset owners out there in the UK. A lot of altnets, a lot of local authorities, a lot of larger entities that have a lot of existing asset, many of it very difficult to get access to, I hasten to add, Network Rail, road network, etc. And there's a whole bunch of national carriers out there with a lot of fibre. Everyone's got a different process, different workflow, different products even. And for a wholesale market really to succeed, there needs to be a common understanding of what's been bought and sold. So that's really why Asset Hub is here. It's to map that existing infrastructure, all the assets and the connectivity, define or help to define a common set of standard products that we were discussing earlier, the T's and C's, the SLAs, and to manage the whole process from inquiry all the way through to order and contract. Next slide, please. The sorts of assets, you can probably think of these, and there are many, many more, but you know, streetlights is being actively looked at the moment for small cell and 5G. We're working on a project with DCMS at the moment called DCIA, which is just coming to a close, but it's how to use public sector infrastructure, such as streetlights, street furniture, and buildings. There's a lot of buildings public sector owned. There's a lot of public sector owned fibre and duct, but there's far more private owned fibre and duct out there in the ground. Can you use it? Can you reuse it? Can you avoid people overbuilding you by letting them have access to your physical infrastructure? If you're doing a BDUK Project Gigabit, you have to. You've got no choice. Next slide, please. So speaking of Project Gigabit, whilst some of these statements may be a little old now, I'm not sure if they need to be updated or not, but wholesale is mandatory, both passive and active, if you're going after government funding. We have a solution to that, and we've been supporting some of the winning bidders, many of whom are coming up next, I hasten to add, on their Project Gigabit story. Next slide, please. There's a regulatory requirement here as well, so the access to infrastructure regulations, which hasn't been massively successful. It's been around for years. I think it's been kicked around a bit by DCMS, wanting to make it more successful, but we can provide a solution to that using a common interface, a common platform. Next slide, please. The background of this is Sweden, similar to Toby actually. Different parts of Sweden. It's actually the Swedish equivalent of INCA, called SSNF, use this platform and have been using it for the past almost 9 years in Sweden. The Swedish industry is a little different to the UK, but they felt they needed to be able to collaborate more effectively and to start sharing their infrastructure more effectively. So the precursor to Asset Hub was born. It's based on a product from a company called DigPro, which we partnered with and brought that across to the UK. Right now, there's about 140 million euros of transactions each year going across the platform. And in Sweden, they've got sort of 500,000 assets and nodes mapped, a lot of fibre, and there are circa 1,200 users using the platform, with almost 200 companies using it to share and collaborate. In the UK, we've done some further developments to meet some of the DCMS requirements. We've added duct access as a product, access to structures such as street furniture and rooftops and masts and towers, etc. And we've literally just completing access to land, so you can look at new builds, new masts, new poles, or new fibre builds across land. Next slide, please. So as a summary, Asset Hub provides visibility of infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily have to map the infrastructure itself or make it visible, but you can share your capability and the region in which you're operating. You can start to receive inquiries on accessing your infrastructure, physical or even connectivity. Ethernet services are supported as well. It allows the provisioning to happen. So it's a standard process. And this is one of the big problems with industries, that every company has different processes. So we're trying to standardize that inquiry quote order process, and also standardize the products, the services, the SLAs that sit behind all of these products, so that everyone has a common understanding of what's being sold. Right now we support duct and dark fiber access, and interestingly, with duct, we're also starting to map a lot of abandoned utility infrastructure, gas pipelines. There's about 10,000 kilometers of those mapped on the platform, which could be used to house duct. We've got masts and cabinets and street furniture and chambers and also Ethernet services ready to go as well. So the idea is really to reduce costs, speed up deployment, hopefully helping altnets generate additional revenue streams, and perhaps more importantly, to avoid overbuild. Next slide, I think, is the final one. There we go. So it brings all of these things together. The product definition, which has enough flexibility in there to meet people's needs to be, differentiating their services. There's flexibility in those products. Where are they? Where are the capabilities? So the geolocation, either via address or region, UPRNs, etc. Standard legal contracts, and this is the bit really where sort of I've been pushing from an INCA perspective, that industry needs to come together and agree some of these things, not all of them, but to agree some sort of standard contracts and frameworks and T's and C's, etc. The platform manages the entire inquiry, quote order and contract process, and then all of those inquiries and contracts are then archived and with a full audit trail. So you can go back to them again at the end of the contract and either renegotiate or cancel. I'm not sure if there is another slide actually. No, that was it. I whizzed through on that one. So hopefully I've caught up with a bit of time.
Thank you, Rob. That's really very helpful. And turning to Lloyd from Common Wholesale Platform. Lloyd.
Okay, thank you very much. Katie, would it be possible I do a screen share? I'm going to be asking you to push the click button every 3 seconds, otherwise. I've just seen how the slides are, so thank you. And I think it's that one. If you can confirm that you are seeing that.
Yep.
Marvelous, thank you very much. I think when you look at this, for me, the thing to remember is what are we trying to address? What are we trying to do? And I need to make very clear to everybody in the room that I'm not wearing my county broadband hat here. This is very much, what happened with the Common Wholesale Platform is that there was a group of providers started talking. It came out of INCA, and we said, well, we're going to need a solution for wholesale. How are we going to address that? And the answer we came to was that we were going to need to address that by having a wholesale platform that we could all use. So that's the journey we started on. But that was nearly 3 years ago when we first had those discussions. So the question really is, why are we? There was real separation in the bit we were talking about earlier in this meeting, which is all about the issues with grants and how we access the money. This section is just about how can we support, how can we support the industry to be successful in bids. So let's just wear that hat in this discussion. And the first question then is, who needs the support? And I suspect that it's a small subset of INCA membership that needs support, because it's only going to be a small subset of companies that are going to be bidding for gigabit projects. The bigger ones of those companies will not need support in wholesale. They come with wholesale already. If we think about City Fibre and you think about all the other, large organizations, you instantly realize that they've already got wholesale sorted. So the industry requirement for a common wholesale platform is actually a very small subset of people, and let's keep that in mind. So this is to help those people have a fully compliant bid when they take part in the Bid UK ITTs. Then the next group is people that we're trying to help is, well, actually, who in the industry is going to need one-touch switching support? Because we all know that's coming. Who's geared up and who's ready for it? Because for smaller companies, again, it's not going to be a straightforward case of you just connect to Totsko when it's launched. You're going to need something in the middle of that. And I suspect that group of people, the OTS group of people, is actually a slightly wider set of people that are going to need this. But in order for one-touch switching to work, you have to have access both to the networks over which you're delivering and other people's networks. And they have to have access to yours. And that's a very complicated thing to try and fix as a small operator. So when we look at what we're trying to solve, what we're trying to do is open up altnet coverage to any service provider. And we engaged with BT, and what we've delivered is a wholesale compliant solution that meets the tender requirements. In addition to that, we've gone on and engaged with the OTA, and we've also now got a one-touch switching solution that is built on the OTA specification. Beyond OTA, we've worked with Totsko. And what we've put together is a hub that allows smaller operators to use a messaging portal, larger operators to do so through an API, and for the ticketing and messaging systems that are needed to be provided as an interface between smaller operators, mid-sized operators, and Totsko. Larger operators will still build their own platforms that will interface with Totsko. So that's not the audience either. So this is a solution by the industry for the industry. And that's what we've tried to do. We move on and ask, well, what do? We provide wholesale access to multiple networks, and we can enable switching in a way that is simple and straightforward. There's a little technical piece which I'm not going to go through in detail. You can read that when you can download the slides. But the point is, it's operational. We're not talking about a project that we've built that we want to make happen. This is now a live solution, complete with the ability to do one-touch switching as soon as it becomes a requirement. I'm sure you've all seen that Ofcom have now released a statement that says, well, we understand that Totsko are behind, so therefore we can't implement one-touch switching on the deadline. But it's essential that all companies have started their journey and have done everything they can to be ready for Totsko when they launch. Well, the question is, are you? If Totsko were launching in April like they were supposed to be, are you ready? What we've done is spend 2 years. The fact that it was a collaboration of 4 companies, which was ITS, Airband, White Fiber, and ourselves, is irrelevant. We were just companies from within the industry that got together. We created a requirements document that took 3 months. We went to a full tender process that took 4 months. We contracted and built a solution over the following 6 months. And we've put that into testing and acceptance over a following 5 months. And we now have an operational business that does exactly what it says. We chose a partner to do this, recognizing that the necessity for security, resilience, was all, a huge part of offering a viable solution to the industry. So we chose a company in the tender process that had over a decade of experience in Europe of managing switching and exactly this requirement, and is already switching more than 1.5 million switches every month globally. So the fact that it was just a conglomerate of a small number of companies that have come together in the UK the solution that we've put in place is absolutely rock solid, robust, and proven. I think just to close, last slide, I think really is we're trying to make sure that ISPs networks have full utilization. It's as simple as that. We're trying to make sure it's easy to connect to them. We've put ourselves in a position where you can actually take part in Project Gigabit simply by saying this is the process we're using. And obviously, we recognize how important it is for many altnets to access gigabit funding. In principle, if you start trying to integrate with multiple networks yourself, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. All we've done is simplified the process as per the diagram on the left. You integrate once, all the companies integrate once. It's an easier way, much more straightforward of achieving the aim. Who do you use? Listen, the point is we have a working solution to do it. It's an industry-based, not-for-profit enabler. That's why we set this up. We recognized it was going to be needed. We created a not-for-profit, member-governed business to do it. And we've built a platform that's fully compliant with the OTS and BDUK requirements. So, you know, I think the last slide really is to say to you, it's about getting people to join this now. This is not a business set up to make millions of pounds. It's a business set up to enable the industry to operate and work and meet the requirements of legislation as well as of commercial need. So we're not looking to get fees for setting you up. We're not looking to get fees as a retailer for switching on the network. We recognize that until it's operational at scale, that's just not going to happen. So let's get to a point where the industry can finally coalesce behind one methodology, which isn't happening at the moment. All we're seeing is, you know, the larger operators are creating their own platforms. No surprise to that. You know, whether it's going to be the one Fiber Nation, whether it's going to be the one for City Fiber, they've got their own wholesale platforms. We need an industry response that is suitable for the altnets that don't fit that category. So thank you for your time and for listening. That's what we've put together. We've got Hannah, would be delighted to talk you through in detail how it works and what's needed for integration. It's minimal now. We've created the steps involved. And for anybody that wants to talk to Hannah, get in touch, please. And there you go. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. That's really helpful. We're a little bit short of time, so I think we'll save questions for the end of the session. What I'd like to do now, though, is to ask our winners panel to show yourselves, make yourself known. Could you stick up your hands? Use the reactions to put your hand up, and therefore you'll move to the top of the screen, which is very helpful. So on the Zoom call, you should see a little button saying reactions. There we are. That's great. So we've got Helen, Andy, and do we have Hector here? Hector. Yes, and Hector. Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much for joining us. It's really great to hear from you. Would you like just to quickly introduce yourselves first of all? Helen, we heard from you a little bit earlier, but would you like to say who you are and where you're from?
I am Helen Wild. I'm the CEO of Wildernet, which is based in the Southwest. Our head office is in Liskeard in Cornwall, and we're in Altnet, which serves Devon and Cornwall with a focus on making sure that digital inclusion actually happens for the Southwest rural areas.
Thank you very much. And Andy.
Afternoon all, Andy Hepburn. Thanks for the invite. It's my first involvement with INCA. It's nice to meet you all. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Go Fiber. So we build network in Scotland and the northeast of England. So we've won 2 Type A's in the northeast, so Northumberland and Teesdale, hence the invite.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy, and welcome to your first INCA webinar. And Hector, welcome to Hector as well.
Hi there, yeah, I'm Hector Gibson-Fleming. I'm the CEO of Wessex Internet, so we're based at the other end of the Southwest, predominantly Dorset, Wiltshire, Somerset and Hampshire, and we won one of the last superfast contracts in Somerset, and more recently the Dorset Type A contract covering North Dorset. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. To kick us off, obviously we've heard a lot about during the course of the day, a lot of concerns and issues about the way that BDUK operates and things like that. But I thought actually it would be interesting to hear from you guys, first of all, about from the coal face, as it were, about what the biggest challenges you faced in the process of getting into the whole BDUK process, bidding and winning, and what you think is coming next. So let's start with Hector, first of all. What do you think were the biggest challenges you faced in the process?
I mean, I think for me, getting your head around the bidding process is really important. I think James and David did a very good job of explaining some of the challenges that you face and some of the thinking that you need to go through as you look at that. Ensuring that you understand what the process is going to look like and some of the hoops you need to jump through as you go through that process is definitely something you need to prepare your team for. Particularly if you're in a smaller organization that's scaling, you'll be used to looking at operational delivery, and you need to pull some of your operational teams away to do what ends up being sort of quite theoretical homework in terms of getting your head around that. So it's definitely a learning curve, and I would say be prepared, certainly for the first bids, to make sure your senior team can get involved and really understand it under the skin, and potentially step back then at subsequent bids. But it's definitely a big piece of work, and there's a lot to do there to make sure you get it right.
What just out of interest, what did you win in the end in Wessex Internet? What
have we won? Sorry.
Yes.
So the initial contract was in 2020, a CDS contract, which was one of the last superfast contracts. We've also done a number of pieces of work around local deliveries of for gigahubs. So 2 gigahubs programs across Dorset, and more recently the first awarded Project Gigabit Type A in North Dorset.
Thank you very much. Helen, what do you think the biggest challenges that you've faced in this process have been?
I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, what was said earlier from Prism and from James is true. You need to have a structured approach to this. It is like sitting an exam. You need external help and coaching to get that done, but you also need to have a campaign. And I think the thing that I think we possibly did differently is we made sure we had a vision about what it was going to deliver. We had a firm fact base about the benefits, and we made sure that we lined up the local authority and also the local MPs to support us. And the comment made earlier about the dichotomy of how much influence those local aspects have on a bid is true, but it's also a point of leverage. So therefore, making sure your local MPs back you, making sure that the local authorities back you, that's a big time challenge. And doing that in an appropriate manner, so you're not compromising anybody's morality, is really, really important. So, forming a view around a core subject which resolves the issues locally for those type A's in particular is a good way to put your bid together, and being able to demonstrate factually what you bring to the party and how you're going to do it. So we took 6 weeks out of the business as a senior team, with some help from James and others, and we put together our bid on that basis. And it was like sitting an exam. It was almost like doing a Viva, to be perfectly honest, on an MBA. It was hard work in terms of getting that done. But once you're in the flow of the questions, you do have the opportunity to go back, query, question, ask what you're doing. So if in doubt, the best thing always is to raise questions as you're answering those going forward. It's a focused activity. You can't put it down, stop it, restart it. You need a focused team on it, a core team who are going to manage what you're doing. And also the other thing is you need to keep all your stakeholders happy while you're doing it. So, getting your board involved in understanding what that practically means and what you're signing up to actually means, you do spend a lot of time doing this. It's not just filling in the paperwork, it's the whole activity end to end. You're running a campaign effectively to make sure that you get the right result.
That's really useful. And Andy?
Yeah, I'd probably just reiterate some of the points raised. I think, it's complex, right? It's a good panel of experts internally. And it's expensive. It's expensive to bid these things to the business. That's both in terms of cost, but also in terms of time when you're trying to run your BAU delivery. I think we've mentioned a few times getting a bid partner is we found it kind of key, because it does come at an additional cost, but it's not taking your people away from doing the your BAU build. Because the documentation, Helen, you said it's extensive. Although it's like sitting an exam, it's quite a hard exam to sit, especially the first time you sit it. In particular, the financial modelling aspect of it is complex. There's a number of complex questions there. There's an art in refining those questions to fit the workout that you get, because sometimes 1,000 words to answer something very complex is not very many. And I think that then pushes things into CQs, and although the CQ process works well, there's a lot of back and forth, so you have to give time for that as well. So I think it is a lot of time. It's long days. We spent a lot of time on the ones that we've submitted so far. And just one thing that James mentioned earlier, the thing that I think still needs work is the wholesale pricing part. We seem to be going round and round in terms of trying to justify benchmarking and wholesale pricing. And every time we submit something, we still get the same questions back, even though we've asked CQs back to BDUK. So that's an element that definitely is a challenge.
Okay, so what I'm taking out of that is it's a campaign. You've got to get local people on board, because there will be some influence from having local authorities, MPs and so on engaged in understanding what it is you're talking about and supporting you. Secondly, it's going to require a lot of senior management time to focus on this as a very, very focused activity. Think very hard about getting some external support. It's not going to be cheap. It's going to be very expensive to actually get into this process and treat the whole thing, as I think David said, as an examination rather than a sales opportunity. Is that a reasonable summary? Oh, James, you've got your hand up. Quickly, James, yes.
Surprisingly good value.
All right, put your hand down now. Thank you. Right, now, next question I've got. BDUK have come in for a certain amount of criticism this afternoon, which I think is part of the course, to be honest. I mean, they are in that seat where they should expect people to be asking some hard questions, not just from our side of the table, but also from the government side as well. How would you rate the support you've got from BDUK? And I think I'll start with Helen, because I think I know what the answer is, Helen. So yes, well, how do you rate BDUK in terms of the support and help in the process?
Okay, controversially, I have nothing negative to say about BDUK. Okay, what we have found is within the confines of what they've got to do, they are probably, and I've worked inside the civil service for a couple of years, for a while, doing special projects. I do know what they're like. They're probably the best organized department that I've ever worked with. They have a very, very tight brief. They are spending public money. They are carrying a lot of the current government's political direction. They're seen as a success story. They're under pressure. However, when you ask them for help, what you get is a very high quality delivery of result. Now, I think there may be some regional variation in that, because we're very well served in the Southwest. The team who work with us in the Southwest, I hope Hector agrees, because it's the same team, I think are outstanding. They're very knowledgeable, they're empathetic, they're very careful and considered in their answers. So I've got nothing negative to say about the BDUK action team in terms of supporting us on the bids, helping us through that process. I think that they mediate a very difficult route very, very well. And they manage those interactions. And it may be that where some of you have had different experiences, it may be a local variation, but certainly my experience is nothing bad to say. I think to a certain extent, we might be collectively as a group being naive about what BDUK have got to do. And I think to a certain extent, there is always the question about how might I do this differently to help you? And I wouldn't hesitate to ask that question of them to find out what is it that they're trying to achieve. And you may get an answer where you just need to think about what they've just said to you, but they will try and tell you what they need. And I think they're working in a very, very thin area where they have only a certain amount of variation that they can make. So I wouldn't make assumptions about their competence or their desire to want to involve us as altnets. I think they desperately want us in the game, but they are working on a very, very, very small area where they can twist and turn. And it is really worth investing time and energy getting close to them, understanding what they're trying to achieve professionally, understanding their goals and the difficulties that they face. And I actually, like I said, I have nothing negative to say about teams that we've worked with, because actually, both on the vouchers and the F20s, they've helped us create the business we're creating in the Southwest, which allows us to fulfill the objectives that we want to as a business. And I think, you know, my experience is I'd encourage you all to do as many type A's and type B's as they come, because I think they're great for your business if you come at them with that open attitude.
Thank you very much. Andy, how do you rate the support you've had from BDUK?
Yeah, well, I actually agree with Helen, and maybe it's because we're winners on these ones, right? But and maybe I've got two reasons to be unpopular. I found BDUK to be very helpful, and before I joined Go5, I was the national build director for OpenReach, right? So I actually have spent a lot of time with BDUK DCMS over the years, bidding contracts previously to Go5. So I think during the process, the run up to the bidding, I think it's well structured, well documented. They answered the questions that we posed to them. That, you know, they always came back to us. Obviously, during the closed session, it's closed, but then afterwards, the CQ process, you know, was fine. I think where we are in terms of the two type A's, because we're just coming out of the 6-month survey period on the two that we've won. I would say at the very start, I mean, a lot of the people in BDUK are quite new. They've got quite a new team, and there's been a lot of co-learning since we started. So, you know, we came out the blocks quite quick. Within days of winning, we were in discussions with BDUK around the reporting requirements and the governance and everything. And it's been a good partnership since, you know, they have been supportive since you know, we found out last year.
Thank you very much. And Hector, you've had quite a long experience with BDUK.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably echo some similar points. I think what Helen said, I agree with. I think from our perspective, I think whenever you're having a discussion with them, or whenever you're looking at how they're acting, it's really important to not only see our perspective and where we're coming from on this, but as an industry, but also to look at the pressure that they're getting from ministers and the pressure they're getting from the top. And I think that if you look at and understand that, when you're starting to have, I joined just at the back end of some of the comments about how they're looking at type C's and things. You've got to look at the pressure that they're getting and the mandate that they're getting from central government. And I think if you're going to have a discussion with them, you need to come up with reasoned arguments why what they're doing is wrong when considering the mandate they've got and when considering all angles. And I think, you know, from our perspective, I would agree with Helen that I think I would say from, you know, I first started engaging with BDUK or DCMS in 2015. We found them to be responsive. I think they've moved very fast, and I think actually the reason that this industry largely sits here as a wide range of altnets is because they've created competition, and the huge amount of what they've done with the voucher schemes, with the connected city schemes before it, and you know, more recently with Project Gigabit, has actually created fantastic commercial and competitive tension. It's forced OpenReach to slash their prices in building fibre at the very least, even if we weren't successful as an industry in doing anything else. And I think when we come to, you know, more practically nuts and bolts of contracts, I think what Andy was saying, we would definitely recognise they're a team that have grown. There are a lot of new recruits there. I think that seems to have always been the case since I've been working with them, and they keep growing. But certainly now, you know, the difference from our CDS superfast contract to what we're seeing with the Project Gigabit contracts is you know, that as we've started those contracts, we're starting to see the central government have to undertake some of this reporting and sort of management functions that before they were seeing the local councils undertake, and they're definitely feeling their way with that. So we've started some of that work quite early on. I suspect we've been able to lead them on some of that slightly because we've been in that kind of reporting framework for the last few years with CDS, and we've had quite a good working relationship there as well. But I think that's going to be something it takes them another sort of year or two really to feel their way through from a practical perspective. But I think certainly looking at the structure of the procurements that they've put in place, you know, they have to make progress, and so we can't expect them to sit around, you know, all the time for us and wait for all of us to bid stuff if we're not going for it today. So I think they're in a difficult position to get things done, and they do a good job of moving quickly. And I think they do listen to the industry if you're constructive with them. Okay,
so that's generally very, very supportive in terms of, you know, your experience with BDUK. That's very useful to hear. The third area I thought is worthwhile, you know, asking about is the impact that winning has had on your business, and undoubtedly it's going to be significant. But it would be interesting to understand that a bit better. Let's start with Andy on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's significant. You know, in essence, it's a game changer for us. I mean, Go Fibre, our business case is to build both commercially and we're funded to do that, but also we're funded to win F20s. And we see the gigabit contracts as really accelerating in terms of growing our business. We want to be a scaled operator, and what it brings is obviously the funding to build the network itself alongside our commercial network, but the opportunity on additional commercial network on the back of the the F20 network itself. Emotionally, it's great to win. The euphoria at the start to win, but then it sets in what I think someone mentioned it earlier. It's just a start. These are complex, really complex builds. The rural builds. I've built quite a bit of rural network over the years, and I know how challenging it is when you've got a contracted build. So a commercial build, you can choose to stop at any one point. If it becomes too expensive, or if your business case change or your funding changes. But here that you've contracted to deliver, and you really have to commit to that. So you've got to make sure what you've bid up front is something you can commit to. I think as James said earlier, is like after the winning, there's another 2.5 years of build, another 7 years of commitments on the back of that. So we know that the F20s will be challenging, and really just at the start of that journey.
Okay. Helen.
I think it's quite interesting because it immediately overnight. So Cornwall, we're in Cornwall, okay, and it's we're the last place before you hit America, okay. So we're down the bottom end, and overnight we went from being just another company down in Cornwall to being one of the top 5, engaged on everything. How are you going to make this happen? Questions coming in from everywhere about how does this make a change for Cornwall? And it is a tight community, and it was a really positive experience because you realise, you're coming to work to do something good in terms of creating that opportunity, that wealth, that opportunity through connectivity. And it has changed the nature of our business. And that comes with great responsibility and accountability as well in terms of our ESG agenda, how we manage our relationships with the supply chain, etc., etc. So that was a game changer for us because we won 2 at the same time, and it was announced on the same day. I think the other thing is that it woke up BT, if I was totally honest with you, and I tend to basically prefer to be a submarine than on the surface. It's much safer under the water, and suddenly I've got them banging around. And my concern here is, whilst I think BT UK are great, I have some concerns about how controlled BT Openreach are through the regulator. And I'm worried because this potentially in terms of impact could create ourselves and BT in Cornwall as the 2 games. And I am there sitting being shot at by the largest monopoly in the UK, where I am actually set up to do social digital inclusion, drive through purpose and profit, not just profit. And I come from the Southwest, and I feel a great deal of pride in delivering on behalf of my home counties in terms of this outcome. And that is an impact that I worry about continually, is about what sort of behaviours we'll see, reactions to the polls, stamping on equipment, etc. It's not good. So one of the impacts has been suddenly we're on the dial in terms of where that looks like and how that's going. I also echo some of the words earlier on. What it has done is, we also build commercially, just like Andy. It's helped us to expedite our commercial build at speed in those areas, and we will do so. And we are going to build so quickly now in terms of our estate and get that job done that it will give real customer choice. And by 2025, we will be able to offer that up with the wholesale provisions in there to everybody and be a challenger brand. And I'm really proud of that, again, being from the Southwest. I think that gives, my compatriots in Cornwall real choice. So it's impactful on your workload, it's impactful on your finances, it's impactful on your public standing. If you like to stay out of the limelight, which I prefer to do, it's a bit frightening. And it gives you this marvelous opportunity that you've never really had before, to be able to extend that commercial build and really reach all those areas which were left behind. We don't overbuild. And what it's done is it's allowed us to take the rest of the areas which are missed out and actually make sure we're fulfilling those as well. So positive impacts, but some pretty scary ones as well.
Thank you very much. And Hector, the impact on your business?
I think for me, the initial impact we had was around Superfast. So probably some of the emotions that the other 2 have spoken about came for us a couple of years ago when we started that contract. The North Dorset contract that we've won, we've been doing a lot of voucher delivery in that area already. So this is really about completing build we've done. It allows us to build faster with more confidence, again, as the others have said, to fill in those areas and extend out to commercial build as well. So we went for the accelerated survey process. So we've actually already started building in Dorset and started build across our area almost immediately following the contract. So for us, it was really a practical get going. Let's get started with this. It's an area that's been solidly in our sights previously. And so, it's a sort of natural extension of what we're doing. But certainly, with the two contracts taken together and the journey from us from early 2020 has been a significant ramp up, reinforce the confidence that we have in our business plan, which is to be a local high penetration business that serves our local communities really well, and create a fantastic local business. And I think that the contracts are reinforcing that business plan. And allowing us to go forwards and build with more confidence and scale our teams with more confidence. Obviously, we do a huge amount of our build, probably around 75-80% of our build is in-house with our own teams, and all of our rural builds with our own teams. So it's allowing us to keep scaling those internal employees and keep scaling our build teams, which is fantastic. And I think one of the things that's really strengthens the piece for us is that long-term visibility. We know we can build that pipeline and we can build the work that we need to do over the next 3 years. Across both of the contracts that we're now working on.
Thank you very much. The final question from me before we move on to the questions from other people. What's the main lesson that you would give to other altnets who are thinking about getting involved in the BD UK process? What do you think the most important thing you could say to them would be? And we'll start with Helen. It looks like you're thinking hard about this right now. So,
well, the first thing I'd say is don't do this lightly. Okay, so don't do this lightly. I think that everyone should have a go at these. I think it's really important. It helps. What it did also provide us with was a perfect set of documentation about how we run our business, which was very useful actually, and we've used it for other things as well. So it's a good grounder to do one of these bids. And get inside your business and understand how it all works and how the IT systems come together and what you're doing here and what you're doing there. It professionalizes you. So I think it's really, really worth doing. It's a real opportunity. It does take a lot of time and energy and it costs money. Okay, so you've got to be prepared for that in terms of how you make those things work. But if you win one, it is a game changer for your business. And, the simple reaction on the day that we announced, I'd obviously known beforehand, but I walked into Westbourne House where we're based in Liscard on the Thursday morning, and it was 5 to 7, and I was just waiting to do the first press. It was under embargo. And there was literally a charge down the corridor of my staff who literally knocked me back off my feet, saying, "We've won the bid, Helen, we've won the bid." Because for them, it's job security. I've got 160 odd people working for me, and we've got 9 turnkey and other contractors on the books. It's over 1,000 people involved in this activity for Wildernet. We've just locked down, loaded down jobs. And that's what you get out of this. And that's a huge benefit right now, because it means you can grow, you can look for funding, you can look for other things. So I'd really encourage everyone to take it seriously. I'd really encourage to get involved. Quite frankly, I'm in Cornwall. If you want to talk to me about what my experiences, I'm happy to have the conversation because I'm not competing. I'm down here in the Southwest. I think working as a team, understanding what it looks like, you should absolutely have a go at this. It will be worthwhile. It'll be a lot of work, but if you win one, it will be just a game changer.
Thank you very much. Andy, what's the main sort of...
Not sure I can add much to Helen's pitch there, to be honest. I completely agree. I mean, it is a big commitment. I think that, you should, I think everyone should go for it. It is expensive, as I said. You've got to think of the long game. Don't take on too much. The bids themselves are complicated, but you've got to make sure that, as I said earlier, you can follow through and deliver on these things. I think it's 2 specific things because I think Helen covered sort of my sentiments quite well, but I would recommend a bid partner, right? They are complicated, so trying to get someone in to support you through this would be vital. And actually, one of the things is that they can bring, or you definitely need to have, is a good network modelling tool, because what you end up putting into your bid is what you're going to have to deliver. So making sure it's as accurate as you can, what you bid is really, really vital. But really, I completely agree with Helen in terms of it's a game changer for us. And we're in Scotland or the North East as well, but I'm happy to speak to anyone, but it's the job security part. We're a similar size, we've got 180 employees. You know, we have the same thing. It's job security. You know, it's growth of our network. It's growth of our business. It's, you know, it's fundamentally it's a game changer for us.
Thank you very much. And Hector.
I think for me, there's something that James, I think it was James said previously, of, you know, make sure if you bid for these things, you want them. At the end of the day, you know, we are talking about the coverage of some of the more difficult bits of the country. So I think it's right to say everyone have a go at these, but make sure your business plan is about delivering difficult properties. Make sure it's about doing those challenging areas. I see there's a question in the chat around, you know, do you have to provide 100% coverage? No, I don't think you do have to provide 100% coverage, but you start getting marked down if you don't. And the intention there, I think, and my understanding is that most of the people who are bidding these things are getting pretty close to that. So you do need to know that you want to drag your organisation in that direction. For us, it's front and centre of what we do is delivering challenging properties. I think there is a good model for that where the subsidy is available, but you've got to make sure it's your model and it's what your business is about. Because they are a major investment, as everyone said, in both the bid process and the delivery. And I think, you know, if you've got to make sure you have good engagement with your local council, good engagement with BDUK, but also that you are able to deliver, because I think you know, what we've heard from others is if you don't actually want to deliver at the end of it, you probably end up having a challenging relationship with you know, throughout delivery. Whereas we found if you can deliver and if your organisation is focused on it, you actually have a very rewarding relationship throughout the delivery process with the authorities.
Thank you very much. Well, that's really very useful and helpful. Really good to hear from you. Tim, you've had your hand up for just about this whole session, so maybe you'd like to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm. And first of all, thank you for that panel session. It is really helpful and enlightening to hear from yourselves, and congratulations on your successful bids. And just picking up on one of the points you made earlier on, that, you know, the time and the effort and the money involved in the commitment, and of course you're the lucky winners, but there will have been losers too, and presumably that has an equally negative impact on their organizations. So how did you convince your board to take that risk?
If I just so our board did do a lot of due diligence, or we did the due diligence proof points with them, which was both economic capability to deliver, staffing profiles, funding. And I'm grateful that they did that, actually, because effectively it helped to shape the bid in the right way. And the point about 100% coverage, no, you don't promise you something you can't deliver. Do the piece of work properly and only tell them you can do as much as you can, because if you sign something you can't do, you'll regret it. So we were diligent in that piece, and they were diligent. And what that did is it put them very firmly behind us. And we continue to strategically discuss at board both the vouchers, which we think should continue longer, and the other type A's and type B's. And it has their aberrance then for them in terms of context about what was at risk. So I think it is worth absolutely doing the due diligence about whether you should do a bid or not with your board fully engaged, so they understand the risks, because it is difficult to win one of these. I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but it's a lot of work. So if you're going to embark on it with a 50-50 chance at the start of winning it, I see no reason why you shouldn't make them part of that. And also, actually, you know, most of us are actually run by finance houses, let's be honest, PE or debt. They have a view, and actually they're additive. So you need people like James who understand how the whole things work, but you also need to have the people with the finance background to make sure the numbers stack. So I would just make them part of the crowd.
Andy,
very similar, to be honest with you. It's you know, we're a relatively small company, and we engaged the board, you know, from the outset on this, and our senior management team, and worked alongside. You know, again, we're backed by private equity, and you know they're I suppose their strategy is on winning sort of F20 work, but yet we still had to convince them these are the right ones to go for. I echo the sentiment around don't bid what you can't deliver. You know, you know, very few of them I think you can deliver 100%. You know, I don't think they're really geared up in terms of funding to do 100%. You know, so you have to make a case, and you know that's sometimes difficult, because obviously you know that coverage is king and you want to deliver as much coverage as possible. It gives you a better chance of winning. That could drive some, it's good for driving competition in the marketplace, but you've got to make sure that you just don't go out at all costs to win it. And we went through that a lot with the board and our senior management team in terms of how far we were willing to go and justifying the case that we put forward. And back to the original question, which is some have been unsuccessful. Yeah, and I get that, and it's all I can say is from our side is we put our best bid forward on both these cases, but we believe that we could deliver through on what we've committed.
Hector.
And I mean, I think from our perspective, it's probably similar. For our point of view, similar to Andy said, our strategy, so our business plan and our strategy is very much embedded in delivering to complex areas. So, our board was already engaged on board with this because it sits very much within our core business strategy and our core business plan. So, I think from our point of view, there's definitely a comment around. I appreciate the comment around others will have lost. I think we entered the first of these bids not knowing what the outcome was going to be, and you never know what the outcome of the next one's going to be. It's always a learning process. You learn something about your business as you go through it, and I think to a certain extent that's what competition's about. So I think it is it's a useful process, but yes, definitely you have to have your board on behind you. But if it's right to do this, then your board probably, if it's right to bid for a project in your area, your board probably should be behind you because it should be part of your business plan. Going back to Lars' comment about don't do these if you don't really mean it.
Yeah, indeed. James, you've got your hand up. You've got a question, I guess.
It's not a question. It's more sort of a comment, and perhaps making it slightly easier for the three on the panel to actually say something. There is something that the three of them have in common. They all have an absolute commitment to delivering in their area. So BD UK can look at that and say, oh yeah, if we want them to build it, they will build it. And they have absolute alignment of their senior management team with all the stakeholders. So the board, the funders, there is that alignment there. And it makes a huge difference in terms of the kind of the confidence that you can put forward in a bid. Knowing that it's actually going to be supported and going to be delivered. So it is hugely important.
That's a very helpful comment. And Chris, you had a question about the role of local authorities. Do you want to put that question?
Oh, we're not hearing you, Chris.
Not hearing you now, again.
I think they're asking about the role of delivery in the local authorities. In contract obligations, they had about 10% on most of the bids. Comes down to local authority questions. You can quite definitely tell because it's written tonally different when you see them, and invariably they have they're seeking to know for certainty about local jobs, supply chain, your ESG commitments, and your social agenda. I think it's quite an interesting question. Because when you see those two questions on the page, you can definitely spot which one, the 10%, which has come through from the local authority, is written in a different tone. In terms of how you then deliver those, they will be dealt with through BD UK. So BD UK actually normally sit in all the meetings with the local authority while you are dealing with that. So I don't know if that helps at all. So it all falls under BD UK, but you can see the tone. The tone is different of the question.
And Hector, just say thank you very much, Lloyd. I see Lloyd has to drop off now, but thanks very much for your contribution.
I think from my perspective, most of these things, contractually, I think they certainly have a huge amount less involvement than they would have done in Superfast. But at the end of the day, I think it's always worth engaging local authority. If you work with them, they still are, the primary authority you're going to deal with in streetworks. So, I think from that point of view, you need to, from an engagement perspective, from a local perspective, if you don't involve them with build irrespective of the contract, I think you will end up in trouble. And so from our point of view, I said, we probably keep them more involved than the contract stipulates.
And Andy, the relationship with local authority.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think it's the same point. Is that definitely I see them less involved in this, but of course we need to get heavily involved in local authority around planning and streetworks, and so we've done a lot of work in readiness for the actual build itself.
Okay, thank you very much. There are a few comments and questions in the chat that we haven't got to. Angus, for instance, asking what happens to people who get left behind, but I think there are there are other approaches and programs and vouchers, etc., which hopefully can help. But there are always going to be opportunities to continue this conversation, and I would like to thank everybody who has joined this call, all of our speakers, congratulate the winners again. Well done. It's fantastic that you've managed to win some of these contracts, and look forward to seeing people on the next of INCA's webinars and face-to-face events. We'll be running a face-to-face event in Chichester at the end of March, looking at how we can speed up deployment. So look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. Otherwise, welcome to join. You're welcome to join our breakfast calls every other Wednesday and get involved in other INCA activities. So thank you very much, everybody. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.